Okay.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. We will launch into today's meeting of the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission. Happy to call this meeting to order, and I see that we have all commissioners in attendance with the exception of John Reuter and Colin Walsh. First item for us today will be discussion and approval of the agenda as sent out earlier. Does anyone have any items they would like to discuss on the agenda, or would anyone like to move to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second that. Thank you, Jim. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All right. With the agenda approved, we can move on to brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and council liaisons. We'll go in that order. So, members of the staff, do you have any brief announcements for us today?
None at this time.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, we'll go through. Anyone has any brief announcements? We'll start on my right side. Jordan, if you've got any for us today?
Happy to do that today. Otherwise, that's all I have.
Thank you.
I have none, thank you.
None at this time, thank you.
Nothing. All right. Nothing for me as well. Thank you. And Council Liaison.
Yeah, I don't have a mic, so I hope you can all hear me.
I get it. Stand up, fix that.
Oh, great, thank you, Stan. So no big updates, but I just want to thank you because this meeting tonight is probably one of the most important meetings you may have all year. And so I want to thank you in advance for all the thoughtful comments I know that you're going to make.
Thank you, Donna. All right. So with that, we'll close the brief announcements, and we'll open the floor up to public comments. So at this time, members of the public can approach the dais and make comments on items that are not included on the calendar. If anyone would like to make comments on items not on today's calendar, please feel free to approach the dais. I'll give you a moment. And Stan, just as a point of order, will you two be doing like the timing for public comments going forward on this and future items?
I will. Any public comment, I'll go ahead and set the timer.
Perfect. Thank you. And seeing none on this, on no general comments, we'll close this public comment and move over to the consent calendar. So on the consent calendar, we have several commission minutes that were sent out prior to this for meetings last year and our last meeting in February. Do any commissioners have items they would like to note on any of those minutes? All right, seeing no points of comment there, would anyone like to move to approve these minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. And that's unanimous. Great, thank you so much. All right, so that leads us over into our regular items. So we'll start today's discussion with review and discussion of the Village Farms Biological Resource Preservation Alternative. In particular, we'll be discussing the Urban Forest Natural Resources and Sustainability Plan. I'll open the floor to staff to take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Darren Denler, Principal Planner with the Community Development Department. I'll be presenting the brief staff report for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions throughout the evening. The proposed Village Farms development would be a new almost 500-acre neighborhood in North Davis. It's comprised of approximately 1,800 dwelling units of both attached and detached and market rate and deed restricted affordable homes. It also includes a community park, a neighborhood park, a natural habitat area, an educational farm, a pre-K daycare, a fire station, green belts, and an urban agricultural transition area, or UATA, as you'll see it abbreviated. The project has evolved since we took on application almost 2 years ago. It should be noted that through the course of the environmental review and analysis, while we've been preparing the EIR for the last 18 months or more, the originally proposed project has been modified to exclude the designated wetland area described as a playa habitat which is the 47.1 acre natural habitat area that you can see here on this exhibit, the green area in the central portion. Yes, thank you, Stan. The Biological Resource Preservation Alternative, abbreviated as the BRPA, was then analyzed in the EIR as an equal weight alternative, consistent with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA requirements. And it is the project that the applicant is asking the city to review and approve. The Village Farms project requires several discretionary approvals, including a general plan amendment, preliminary plan development or pre-zoning, and a development agreement. I won't go into too much detail. There's a little more background on page 3. Suffice to say, there are several more steps to go through at the county level, and these 3 entitlements will need to be approved by City Council this spring in order for the project to be considered eligible to be put on the ballot in November later this year. The application for the project has been and will continue to be reviewed by staff. Recommendations from the commissions will help inform staff's final review and guide the applicant in finalizing specific project details ahead of Planning Commission's public hearing, which right now is scheduled for later in May. As I mentioned, there's an EIR being prepared, and that work is continuing. The applicant and the city's environmental consultant are working to prepare responses to the over 200 public comments received during the public comment period on the draft EIR. The final EIR with these responses to comments is expected to be available in May. As I mentioned, a development agreement is required for this project. I should say, not necessarily required, but is being pursued by the applicant. And that work has begun. The negotiation is in its preliminary stages. Recommendations from this commission, as well as the other 5 commissions that are reviewing the project, could help inform the city's position during that negotiation. In addition, baseline project features will be a part of the general plan amendment that staff will be bringing forward. They are not drafted as of yet, but they are a component of the general plan amendment, and they are essentially the contract that the applicant brings forward to the ballot measure and is what the public will be asked to vote on. Without going into too much detail, I've got some future approval requirements and future process here. Happy to answer any questions about that, but I'd like to move forward to this evening's agenda for you all. As you, I'm sure, are aware, back in December, the City Council directed staff with which commissions were going to be reviewing the peripheral projects. This commission is one of those 6. And so we are here tonight for you to take a look at those components of the project that are within this commission's purview. There is a regulatory framework that we outlined on page 7 of the staff report. And as you mentioned, Chair, you'll be reviewing the proposed urban forest natural resources and sustainability plan. Just very briefly, the project is subject to compliance with general plan policies and standards, the city's municipal code, the urban forest management plan, and the city's climate adaptation and action plan. Some sustainability features are codified in the Davis Municipal Plan as well as state law. There is the water efficiency landscaping requirements that are codified in Chapter 40. They also are subject to the state's model water efficiency landscape ordinance, which I doubtfully you are familiar with. Similarly, stormwater management standards are prescribed in the Davis Municipal Code, but they are also requirements through state stormwater regulations. Specific to urban forestry, the most recently approved policy document is the Urban Forest Management Plan, which I mentioned previously. That plan, the policies and actions of that plan are organized around 7 goals, including promoting tree preservation and protection, optimizing urban forestry programming, and growing a climate resilient urban forest. The proposed urban forest natural resources and sustainability plan for the project is informed by the goals, policy, standards, and actions provided in the urban forest management plan. Additionally, tree planting, preservation, and protection, Chapter 37 of the Municipal Code also provides statutory requirements for protection, permitted removal, and identification of both public and private trees that make up the city's urban forest. And finally, the city's CAP was adopted in April of 2023, and it includes 28 prioritized actions that are a combination of community-wide, municipal, and a hybrid of both to address mitigation, including carbon emissions, and adaptation, addressing climate risk. These actions are encompassed within 5 goals: building, energy, and design, transportation and land use, water conservation and waste reduction, climate adaptation, and carbon removal. The project's sustainability plan is provided as attachment 1 to the staff report. And it does provide 4 main sections: urban forest, natural resources, sustainability, and implementation and verification. Each of the 3 action sections have an objective, and those are what we are seeking your feedback on this evening. These proposals are conceptual and will be further refined later in the development process. It should be noted that this is the one opportunity for this commission to provide feedback. Going forward, the rest of the entitlement process does not allow an opportunity to come back to this body. So we are looking forward to robust discussion this evening. And so the discussion is twofold. Not only are we seeking feedback, we also are asking for ultimately a motion with hopefully a fairly succinct or at least clear group of recommendations and feedback so that we can forward that to Planning Commission and be very clear about what this body's recommendations are. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this moment.
Excellent. Thank you for that presentation and that information so far. So what we'll do at this point is we will go around for the commissioners for clarifying questions based on that, on the information that was just provided or the information that was provided in the packet. We'll keep those two. We'll try to keep that section kind of succinct, so just if there's a kind of a factual point or a procedural point that you'd like clarification on, we'll then open it up to public comment, and we can then at that point, once public comment is completed, we'll then come back and start doing a more robust discussion. So I think with that, we'll start on the left side this time. Commissioner Gamache, if you'd like to open up with any clarifying questions that you may have.
I'm not sure I have any clarifying questions from the presenter here, but I do have a question for us at the commission. I think in the last commission meeting we discussed having a potential rubric for considering items like this in terms of our climate and environmental justice criteria. And in lieu of that rubric, I'm not entirely sure how to approach a project like this. So my question is, are we ready? One, are we ready to take this on? And two, if we aren't, could we use this as a example of as a starting point for getting ready? So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Maybe we can circle back on that during the discussion period too. That's a great point.
Yeah, I have several clarifying questions, but tell me if this is straying from what we're supposed to be doing here. If it's more of a discussion. The material we got suggests that the proposal has to be consistent with Municipal Code Section 37, and that section is woefully out of date. I think it's dating now from 2002, and the Tree Commission spent several years trying to update it. and staff have been working on that. So I'm wondering whether, when we talk about the project conforming to Section 37, whether that's referring to the old one, or is it referring to, has the new one been developed? And if the new one hasn't yet been developed, but is developed and approved by City Council within the next year or two, would the project have to conform to the new one or to the old one?
I would offer that we would be looking at trees during the subdivision maps, the tentative subdivision maps. Talked about that process a little bit in the staff report. That would be the time that when we're processing the maps, those entitlements would be subject to the current city codes. So can't speak to the timing of when the tree ordinance might get updated. The applicant may be able to, when you feel like to bring them forward, once you've concluded your clarifying questions, they can probably give you an idea of what their timing is in terms of moving forward once the project is approved, if it is approved. But we've probably got, I would say, at least 2 to 3 years before the first tentative subdivision map would be coming in. So this is going to take some time, and I would then defer to the assistant city manager if he had some timing on when that tree ordinance might be looked at.
Some more perspective of the tree ordinance. So there's components being looked at, as we initiated that with the tree commission changes and the board changes. Don't have a firm timing on when those might happen, although I would suspect within the next year or two we should see some significant movement, as you identified, and we've been looking at. We have some challenges within the code itself. So I think in chatting with the applicants up to this point, they understand that there are changes in those formats. So I think part of the discussion that we've had now is around, what Chapter 37 looks like or what mitigation might look like from that perspective. So timing is more of a planning from a perspective of when they apply or what code timing they have to adhere to. That's always a question that we could endeavor to answer earlier rather than later in the process.
So if I understood correctly, if the Section 37 is updated, it would be that the project would have to conform with whatever the code was at the time that it comes to the preliminary planning.
That's correct. Unless something was negotiated through the development agreement, otherwise, that is correct. Current code, current state statutes, whatever is in effect at the time of processing a subsequent entitlement, those would be in effect.
So, not to beat dead horse here, but along with the code, Section 37, staff and the tree commission were working on technical specifications and technical standards and so on. Would those also, once those are developed, be included as what has to be consistent with the proposal?
To a degree.
And as one example specifically, there was a effort to change the mitigation fee quite substantially, because the old mitigation fee is totally inadequate.
Sure. Again, it's a matter of timing and ultimately negotiations with the applicants, which is to some degree in planning's court or city as a whole, and council's court ultimately who would approve the development agreement. But in general, yes. One of the examples of the climate ready species list, that we've talked about, that's in works. We've talked about that with the applicant many times, that we don't want to see trees that are not part of that list being presented moving forward. So that's one example of forethought that we've had with the applicants, not just this applicant, but any applicant that's talked about those in that arena.
But these technical specifications would also be part of what the proposal has to conform.
Sure. If we talk about specifications around planting, how we would plant, what's required with plantings, I would think all of those would be part of the plans as they come forward when they put forward their plans for actually building the subdivisions.
And then, I guess one last thing on the urban forest part, the proposal makes some vague statement about trying to maintain or expand urban canopy, and I'm curious if there's within the proposal, if there's a specific metric that's there. On the urban forest management plan, there's a statement saying that the city currently has an overall, over the entire area of the city, a canopy cover of 26%. Is that something that is operable here where this project would have to exceed an overall 26% canopy cover?
I would say at this point in time, the clarity of those details is not evident, or not, we're not down to that granular level of detail at this point. Those negotiations and those discussions will be ongoing. But I mean, pointing to they pointed to the management plan as a guiding document, and so whatever goals and objectives we have there, it would be reasonable to point to those as to say those are the minimums we're looking to achieve as we move forward.
Okay, thanks. And I don't want to proceed more on that, but I do have one question on the sustainability. And again, this might reflect my ignorance of city codes and so on, but it calls for an all electric residences, and different appliances could be different kinds of electric. And I'm wondering what is specified there. For example, inductive stoves or conventional stoves. Would it specify heat pumps or a traditional electric water heater? Those things. What's meant by all electric?
So the plan references Municipal Code Chapter 8, which has to do with buildings, and specifically references the sections about the REACH code. So the project is proposing to comply with the REACH code. Again, it will be applied at the time of building permits, whatever is in effect at that time. And so again, we're looking at a even further horizon than looking at trees for building permits. So I don't believe the code goes into that level of detail. It requires there to be wiring for the potential for a home to be all electric.
I was just indicating I don't know what the REACH code is. So.
And that was, the REACH code was brought to the Natural Resource Commission. It's part of kind of building code. You can think of it, or we were just dabbling in it, but thinking of it more as like a kind of required baseline energy efficiency requirements. And there's sort of a baseline, and then cities can choose to adopt more aggressive standards that are also published by the state. And so the city of Davis has consistently adopted some of those more stringent guidelines, and that's in line with some of the actions that are in the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And it was very technical and confusing for us then too, so thank you for the question. Anything further? Okay, thank you.
I don't have any clarifying questions. Thanks.
All right, I've got a couple clarifying questions. For the habitat area that will be preserved, could you tell me a little bit about the mechanism that will be used to preserve that area on site?
It's a little early for that. I believe the applicant is working through how that would happen. CFD, Community Facilities District, is certainly one option, but I don't know that we've got all of that locked in. That would likely be part of the development agreement negotiations.
Thank you. And this actually might not be quite the right question for city staff, but I noticed in the sustainability plan, Tree Davis is noted as a partner going forward for the urban forest there. Is that a formal partnership with the developers or site or project proponents? Are they part of this project, or is that more of an aspirational goal?
Well, you're discussing.
Yeah, no, we're in discussions under the umbrella of public
Sure. So with Tree Davis, I have discussed that with the applicants, we have the city has a formal relationship with Tree Davis that deals with city assets. So we've discussed with the applicant regarding Tree Davis partnering with them on the private trees that would be, placed in the development. But I don't believe anything formal has been attained at this point.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification. That's all the questions from me. Here.
I just have a couple. Firstly, in the neighborhood mixed use land zone, what would that entail?
So that's essentially a mixed use, could be residential, could be commercial. And it's, at this time, it's fairly undefined other than just the underlying land use. The pre-zoning will not be specific to that, but what will happen is outlined in the staff report. Final plan developments will need to come in at later times, probably in chunks, in phases with the village maps that will provide the final zoning for those villages or those areas.
Great, thank you. And then just one other question. So there's affordable multi-use family units. What is kind of the terminology defined? What is affordable considered?
Now you're getting a little bit beyond my expertise. We are going to the Social Services Commission on the 28th. That might be something that the applicant is prepared to speak to. They've been working with other staff to prepare their affordable housing plan for that commission. So I would ask to maybe see if the applicant can respond to that in some depth.
Thank you. That's all the questions.
I have none, thank you.
Yeah, I think I only have one. So the attachment to the staff report, that was prepared by the applicant, correct? Was that prepared specifically for this meeting, to your knowledge? Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, folks. And we will have more time to return to some of those questions during our discussion here. But before we move on to discussion, we'll open the floor up to public comment. So we'll ask folks who would like to make public comment on this item to approach the dais, and feel free to form a queue if there are multiple commenters. Thank you. And as you start, just make sure to introduce yourself with your name, and we'll start the time.
Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Ray. I'm a longtime Davis resident. I actually emailed much of what I'm going to be talking about, but I have handouts. Would you like it before or after?
Thank you.
Okay.
Two?
Yeah. One of them is the article from UC Davis. So I'd just like to speak about the number of trees that are being proposed to be removed and the classification of them being non-native. And so I really think that this is some level of justification for or that they're trying to sell them being non-native as some sort of justification for removing them. And I really patently disagree. There's a lot of different reasons why removing 952 trees, roughly 77% of the mature trees on the property, is a really bad idea. Most of the trees have already been living there for quite some time without any level of irrigation and doing very, very well. And so there's no real need to remove them because they're quote non-native. Secondly, these trees could be habitat for Swainson's hawk, kites, kestrels, and Swainson's hawks. And Swainson's hawks specifically are an endangered species in the state of California, and they do well with mature trees in an agricultural area. And this is really very much their habitat, and the trees in their habitat should be preserved. And then I want to expand on the fact that the non-native trees are not exactly bad. The City of Davis is currently in collaboration with UC Davis and other experts developing a climate-ready tree species. And they're looking at species from Texas, I think specifically East Texas, I'm not quite sure, to specifically adapt to rapidly changing environmental conditions, extreme drought, extreme, wet, extreme wind, all that bit. And so to say that we're going to remove all these trees, they're nasty little non-natives, we're actively, in the city of Davis, is actually looking at bringing in non-natives. And when I actually looked at the Davis Master Tree List, over 50%, or about 50% of them of those trees are non-natives. So, I mean, even oak trees, they have oak trees that are non-natives, and even redbud. And I'm a board member for the Peter Creek Council, and so we used to have a nursery, so I kind of know a little bit of what I talked about. We used to have the California redbud, and they plant a different type of redbud. And so, anyway, I don't know what my timeline is, but...
That's 3 minutes.
Great, okay. Well, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Stan, can I ask you to distribute the printouts as well for long comment? And we'll just wait one moment before we get you going when we get these printouts distributed. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan.
Thank you for your patience.
Sure. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thanks for your patience there.
Sure, thanks. Jim Flanagan here, also a long-time Davis resident. I was out at Channel A today, and I didn't count them all, but supposedly there's close to 1,000 trees living there, and they've lived there for several decades. If the proposed Village Farms project proceeds, these trees will be destroyed. And I suggest they be left alone. And many others I've talked to share this view too. Indeed, in December of 2023, the County of Yolo sent a letter to the City of Davis and weighed in. The county recommended that the city seriously consider a reduced footprint alternative whereby the proposed Village Farms project would lie completely south of Channel A. And this reduced footprint alternative was never considered by the city, and the DEIR has been harshly criticized for this. If the Village Farms project goes forward in whatever form, I hope that the Channel A trees are left standing, and their numbers, in fact, are augmented robustly by as many trees as the developer wishes to plant, and maybe some will be from Texas. The more trees, the better, and so we can get a robust canopy cover. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. I think we'll do the same thing and wait to distribute them until after the
Okay. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Should I wait?
We'll do the same thing and distribute them after your
just one
comments.
minute.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eileen Sammons. I'm a former City of Davis Planning Commissioner. I also served on the General Plan Update and the subsequent Housing Element Steering Committee years ago. And I'm very familiar with this project because I also opposed it 20 years ago with many other people for many reasons. And some of those reasons still exist. The same problem still exists with this project, such as the 200-acre floodplain
and the flooding risks from it, tearing up Channel A and habitat that will destroy the 952 trees this time they're talking about tearing out as a result of this rerouting. The lack of safe access issues, because they don't really have figured out how anybody can get safely over or under pole line. Because the other area, the Koval and F Street, you can't get across under or over. And then, of course, the toxics issues from the adjacent unlined landfill and sewage treatment plant, which has PFAS leaking onto the project, groundwater. Anyway, so there's traffic impacts, of course, which you guys should be concerned about, because adding to 1,800 units, right now there is an enormous traffic backup now, and it's going to be a lot worse, which will mean particulate matter and exhaust fumes from all the cars backed up, because it's going to be gridlock. So that should be an issue you should be concerned with. But the removal of the 952 trees is egregious and outrageous. That's being, as you've heard, I mean, the excuse being used is that, oh, they're non-natives. Well, you've heard at least about half of the city's tree list is non-natives. And there's research being done at UCD to make sure that we are recruiting new species of trees that are non-native, many of them, to adapt to this climate change and the lack of water and the extremes we have in the valley with heat. So, you know, the problem is that there needs to be, I urge the Commission to push back on all of this, because the project is not ready to move forward. There was a recommendation to avoid all these problems, to make it reduce the size of the project by bringing it down below the channel, preserve the vernal pools. Now, understand the vernal pools has the vernal pool tadpole shrimp. There's only 18 other identified populations in the world. This is the 19th. And it's not protected. Because while they're saying, oh, we're going to just kind of like build around it, there's no conservation easement. There's concerns that once that Channel A is ripped up, which not only will tear up all that habitat and destroy all these trees, that will disrupt the hydrology that helps keep the vernal pools going. So we have this asset here that is being kind of like, it was an afterthought that it's even being protected, because what's still on the table is that the original project did not protect the vernal pools. So that's actually not been officially decided by the council, but obviously they realized once the federal Fed said that, yeah, this vernal pool has to be protected, they realized they had to. So it's not adequately protected. So anyway, I urge the Commission, please push back on the destruction of all these trees. They're saying, oh, well, we're going to put in a bunch of other trees. Well, what's that, 30, 40, 50 years to recover? These trees convert CO2 into oxygen. We're not going to see that for like this, for generations. So they're basically dismissing this and saying basically this is really not that big a deal. It's not worth it for the benefit. All that is avoided if it's below the channel, and it's got to be downsized. Obviously, you can't have 1,800 units on less than 200 acres. But that was the environmentally superior alternative when it was the Covell Village EIR, because I have that EIR and I can show you the documentation, but yet it was totally ignored. So that needs to be added to the EIR. I think, if you could recommend that, that'd be great. But please protect the habitat, including like the channel would not have to be torn up, all that, the trees would be protected. Please help on that, because that's what we're counting on you for. Thank you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I sent you a letter, and it's in my printout letter, but I also emailed it late. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll ask that you just hold on to your comments for one moment as we distribute the handout again. Thanks for your patience. patience.
Thank you. My name is Rena Nair, and I agree with what everybody said, so I'll be brief. But I just wanted to also voice my concern about destroying over 900 trees. We hear about our CAP plan and trying to reduce our carbon footprint, but we really need to sequester carbon, and mature trees will hold more carbon than new plantings. And then we've also heard that swings and hawks nest there, and so and just even saving a few trees won't be enough. We need enough trees to provide enough habitat to have a viable situation there. And then I'm very concerned about the vernal pools as well. I noticed when I tried to read the EIR, it was really long to read, but I didn't even notice vernal pools being mentioned. They had other names for it. We're kind of seeming to discount that really valuable and priceless resource there. So protect the channel, protect the existing hydrology, the vernal pools, and the trees, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? If you'd like to make any comments, please feel free to approach the dais.
Do you prefer me to wait or address
them? And with that, we'll close the public comment period, and we can open up the commissioner discussions. I'm sorry, Stan, is there anything you'd like to add before?
So I think as part of our discussion, we probably would have some questions that the applicant may be better prepared to answer. I think one of which is the specific number of trees that have been commented on. There is some additional information that they can provide at the right time. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so that's good to know. So commissioners, if during our discussion you have particular questions, please feel free to point them over to the applicants that are here with us today, or Stan, and we can see if we need to bring in the applicants too. So I think I started on the left side last time, so Jordan, we'll go back to you and start. You can start off our discussion.
Oh, that's a hefty place to start. So I'd like to have some more to contribute to the conversation as we open the discussion here, but maybe just as a starting point, I know Commissioner Gamage, you mentioned some, concern is sort of, is this the right time to do, are we ready to do this? And I think one of the things I would say to that is I think maybe a long-range calendar topic, the rubric and kind of the methodology by which we review these proposals is something we should absolutely revisit. That said, this entitlement process is going to move forward, so now is our time to, however prepared we are, I think, make the comments that we have and kind of propose any recommendations we have. So I'm fully on board with bringing sort of that rubric discussion back for a long-range calendar item. That said, maybe I'll just open up with some initial thoughts. I think there's a lot to this proposal. It's obviously a pretty massive development. I think there's some very strong feelings in a lot of different ways, looking through the EIR public comments as well, that becomes very apparent. So I think maybe just to frame the discussion, I think we do have a pretty strong staff report here that emphasizes, right, we're looking at natural resources, we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at those things within our purview, so I would encourage us to stay within that. And, of the primary things I'm hearing, from the public and the comments I've seen and I think are relevant for discussion here is, I think answering that question about the number of trees to be removed is going to be really important. And then I know there's some concern about the province of the fill coming in to bring the side about the floodplains and floodplain concerns that we may want to kind of hone in on. But all of that said, I think it's worthy to discuss all of that. I think there's a lot to like about this proposal. I think, fundamentally, we need to do housing in a sustainable way and in a way that protects our natural resources and our climate, advances our CAP. At the same time, we need homes in this community. We do need to continue to develop and make it so Davis is a place where we can all live and enjoy, or to the degree possible. So, I know my fiance works at the vet hospital. She's one of the only staff members on her whole team who's able to commute via bike because we live in Davis, and the rest of her team lives in Woodland, Dixon. One member even commutes from Jackson. So I think looking for opportunities to build housing at all income levels in Davis is very important, and I think it's this commission's responsibility to provide feedback on those things within our purview. But overall, I think if we can get to a development that the community can be proud of and that it increases our housing stock and really makes this a place where we can all live and enjoy, people can come here, go to school, fall in love with the community, as I did, and come back and move here. I think that's something we should keep in mind as well throughout this discussion. So I'll likely have more to say, but I'm really looking forward to talking through this with all of you.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate that sort of interest in understanding the mature tree removal, because I think we all appreciate the fact that mature trees serve, a very different, larger function than young trees. Takes them a while to get there. I was pleased to hear that, there is interest in making sure that the trees that are selected will be the trees that this committee, this group in Davis, UC Davis, as well as, local experts have been working on to make sure that we develop a new tree list that will serve us well moving into the next many decades. So I just think that I would like to know more about, if you're saying that there has been some new information that we should have regarding the mature trees, I'd like to understand that. I really do stress the importance of appropriate trees, and I agree with the comment that my fellow commissioner made about the need for housing, and if we can do this in a smart, responsible way, taking into account all the things that we've heard and are concerned about, I think that's in the best interest of our community.
Thank you. And Kira, actually, I will pause there real quick and ask, I don't mean to put you and Michelle on the spot, but I did mean to just bring us back to, if you have any thoughts of, that could help Commissioner Gamage and kind of the frame up our discussion about how you all see environmental justice intersecting with this project in particular, or projects as we review them. I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, so feel free if you want to come back to that a little bit later in the discussion. But since you two led that effort in the Natural Resource Commission and did just an outstanding job, I thought maybe if you can touch on that during some of this discussion, I think it would really help.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. So one of the big pieces that Michelle and I had worked on with the environmental justice framework was just that it is a framework. It's a mindset as you're looking through a project and understanding it with kind of this racial equity lens. And so understanding low-income groups that would be impacted, having different minority groups that may be impacted, how we would go about kind of making sure that everything is equitable for everyone. And so that was kind of my question earlier about the affordable units, because this is something that I think is very critical, and I really appreciated my previous commissioner's comments because I have a lot of concerns about the trees as well, but I also recognize that we do need housing, and we need affordable housing for all of the people that are moving to Davis and live in Davis. And so I think that just kind of being mindful of all of the different people and the different organisms that live in this space and trying to make sure that we just appeal to all of Davis and not just to certain sections of Davis. So that's kind of my thoughts. Michelle, did you want to add anything on that?
I have the framework. I have the framework here if you want me to quickly go through the questions or the ideas. I don't know.
If you could pick out, Michelle has pulled up the framework that they created for the Natural Resource Commission, and in that framework, there's a couple of key questions that we use to kind of consider these projects. And so, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind, I think it would be really helpful to just, if you could, pull out a couple of representative questions or main points that you think would be relevant here. I think that could help our discussion move forward.
Okay, yeah, and I will start with, this was submitted in public in March 2024. So if anyone wants to go back and find it and use this as for the staff or for the applicant, I think it would be really helpful to come back with this kind of thing and probably help you with some of the other commissions as well. Like, can't remember the name of the other offhand. I think they've all changed. So to give you an overall, there's 4 basic areas. We looked at kind of a sequence of project planning, data, equitable impacts analysis, and accountability. So we're kind of here in the planning stage, although we may be a little bit in some of these others. So for project planning, we should be asking ourselves as we look at this project, does the project have specific equity concerns? Have affected groups been defined? Who benefits from or who will be burdened by the project? Does the project include objectives to reduce environmental injustices and define the benefits to affected groups? How have the potentially affected groups been meaningfully involved in the project? And I'll just say we do have some sort of glossary terms for these or references, maybe multiple, to help define words that can be helpful too. How does the project support or align with existing Davis City Council equity priorities and what are known inequities in this field of work. And then we get into data where we're really looking at the numbers of this, like how many people have participated, what kind of qualitative or quantitative data do we have, what kind of metrics do we have to show that we've identified disproportionate burdens in affected groups. And I think I'll stop there. I think that's probably enough. The rest of them kind of go further into the project process.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for pulling that up. And again, apologies for putting you two on the spot and making you carry that. Do you have any kind of other discussion points though that you'd like to bring up as we think about this more broadly based on what we've heard so far on this project? Whether DJ related or otherwise.
I think I'll wait. I don't know that Kira was done.
I think I'm comfortable moving forward.
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. I really appreciate the comments so far from other commissioners about the need to kind of balance the environmental protection here as well as the critical need for housing. With my background in planning and environmental analysis, I do see this site as almost. I work a lot with infill projects, and this is almost like a mega infill project as you have urban development on three sides, basically. But I do share the concerns that have been raised about how exactly will some of the existing natural features be protected in perpetuity. How do we? What types of mechanisms will be used? I think having certainty around what types of mechanisms will be used to protect that habitat going forward is critically important for us in order to kind of make an informed decision about whether or not this should go forward. So I think that needs to be something that the Planning Commission also considers. And I'm sorry, I guess I should step back here a little bit and just as a commission and kind of what we should be kind of moving towards here. This is an action item for us. So by the end of this discussion, I do hope that we have a kind of a list of actions or recommendations that can be moved on to the Planning Commission and City Council. So I'll be kind of framing some of my comments around that, and we can come back, add, subtract, discuss what you would all like to add, what you all do or don't agree on, and then hopefully we'll get a movement at the end. Although I did appreciate the content and the breadth of information in the staff report and in the sustainability plans, I think we missed an opportunity here to more kind of conclusively bring in the climate action and adaptation plan. I think having a crosswalk, as is done for many of the City of Davis regulations, saying, for instance, where you are saying that there will be no natural gas usage on site, that aligns with the CAPS policy exactly, and I think it's a great opportunity both in staff reports for these types of development projects as well as the sustainability plan to say this aligns with the climate action and adaptation plan. I think that's unfortunately a miss because I think that sort of thing is a big step forward for this project and a real win, something that we really focused on in the Natural Resource Commission. So I've mentioned the bit about habitat preservation. One thing I'd also like us to consider as we move forward here is some of the objectives that are included in that sustainability plan. One objective, for instance, for the sustainability section speaks of kind of the energy efficiency and the sustainable design. I would love to see that sustainable design piece made a little bit more specific in that objective. So are we talking about things like passive solar, or are there going to be specific design guidelines for these neighborhoods that take advantage of some of that tree planting to provide shading during the summer? Are there ways that can be made more specific rather than sustainable design can be a pretty broad, pretty unclear term? And so if we can workshop something there, maybe give a recommendation, make that a little bit more effective, I think that would be a strong point. And finally, as we think about some of the active transportation that will be included and some of the transportation issues that we see with this project, I think Jordan's point about allowing folks to live within Davis, that will actually, although there will be more cars at this site, it might actually offset cars moving into the city from pole line coming from Woodland. I'd also love to see a little bit stronger of a connection between the active transportation infrastructure and the tree planting that's going to go on. That was something I remember discussing in an urban forest management plan that I thought was a really great takeaway, is how big of an impact that can be on allowing people to walk and bike to places if you're doing strategic tree planting. And I think the sustainability plan would be a great place to do that as well. So thank you. We'll go back to you, Michelle.
I have several questions. I don't know if the applicant wants to come up and answer questions now. This is the appropriate moment.
We could get through, each person kind of giving their initial thoughts, and then if we want to go into questions, it's kind of open, it's at your pleasure. But I thought after everybody had a chance to kind of speak and formulate kind of their initial thoughts, then if you have specific questions that the applicant would be best to answer, we can certainly do that, starting with the tree planting or the number of trees.
I think that sounds good. That's kind of the de facto way we're doing over here, so if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think almost everything I have is a question, so I think I'm going to wait.
So the problem coming towards the end of this is that a lot of it has already been said, but maybe I'll phrase a few things somewhat differently and try and be very succinct. In terms of planting native trees, the thrust in restoration ecology now is to plant trees that are native to what the climate is expected to be in the future, not the historical native to an environment, a habitat that is not going to be conducive to survival. In terms of the general proposal, like other people, I find the lip service given to things in terms of, they're going to be very sustainable and environmentally wonderful. I mean, that's good. I mean, not all in the past, not all proposals have had that kind of phrasing. Obviously, the devil is in the details of what actually gets proposed. No proposal is perfect or going to please everybody, because they have to meet competing objectives here. And while we want to protect the environment, we also need to protect the human environment and provide housing for people and so on. So we have to find the proper balance, and that balance might mean that we don't have the perfect housing and we don't have the perfect protection of the environment. So that's where we have to find what the proper balance is. The guiding requirements are as I've mentioned in the questions, Section 37 of the Municipal Code and CAP, and both of those items are subject to revision and updating and refinement and making them more stringent. And I urge the city staff to work diligently on updating, especially Section 37. As an example, one of the items that was actively discussed in past years with the Tree Commission and so on is that the mitigation requirement is totally inadequate, that one tree removed should be replaced by 3 new trees planted, and that if trees aren't planted, the fee should be much higher than what is currently proposed. So we need to upgrade the mitigation requirement there. But I think, remind me, correct me if I'm wrong, but the CAP was also a document in progress that it's up to revision in the next year or two, and that could result in a more stringent set of requirements. And again, I urge city staff to do that as quickly as possible so that this project will conform to updated city requirements and so on. In terms of environmental justice, my naive examination of the proposal The main concern that struck me was the location of the high-density affordable housing right on Covell Boulevard, which has very high traffic, and that leads to air pollution and so on. Again, the Tree Commission in the past has addressed this kind of an issue by proposing that there be a buffer zone of trees between the city, between the street and then the housing. Now, we've opted for having a 200-foot zone. I don't think that's feasible, but in any case, that's something that should be examined, that's a crucial matter in terms of trying to protect residential areas from the traffic pollution. It might be a lesser problem along pole line, but it should still be considerable along pole line also. Even middle-income people need to be protected. And then finally, in terms of environmental justice, I think we're all, through state law at least, moving towards all-electric transportation. So I think, especially with the high-density affordable housing, we should not just have the wiring for charging, but charging is a difficult issue, and so maybe that should be a place where the charging infrastructure should also already be in place, not just wire ready. So from now I'll leave it at that. I might have more comments later.
Thank you everyone for all the comments. In lieu of a established framework or rubric, I do want to thank you for bringing up what you've done in the past in the NRC. That was very helpful. Just so the public knows, we've only been, this is our 4th meeting, so we're still trying to figure out what we're trying to do here. But what I can offer today is a perspective. I don't know, let people figure out what to do with this perspective. I offer an indigenous land tending perspective, and from that perspective, the way we do things matters as much, if not more, than the what that we're trying to do, because an adequate process yields adequate outcomes. So what I mean by that is, from an indigenous perspective, the earth is an organism which requires gradual changes in relationship with her. And so what that means is, when we are trying to modify the environment, in terms of changing the trees, changing the ecosystems around the trees, usually that's done over several years, very gradual changes, and we also check in with the earth to see how she's responding to these changes. Typically in urban planning processes, it's more of a conceptual system where we draft a plan and then we just execute the plan, and the earth just has to deal with whatever we do to her. And what ends up happening on our end as a city is that over time, this is what we're discovering with the tree removal process, the trees, the landscape starts doing its own thing, and so then we have to figure out what to do with the houses, because they were built too close to tree lines, and then we have to figure out what to do with the roofs when they're, invading the homes and all this stuff, because the housing was built too quickly and we didn't really understand how the land was going to react to the new system of planting and arranging of the trees. Specifically, the trees become an issue because they do grow and they get big, and the way they grow is a little, we can't really tell. We can predict what might happen, but nature always has her own plan. So my perspective is, and this perspective is something that has to be thought of in terms of the long-term way that we plan things as a city. How do we approach things more gradually so that we can actually check in with the earth as we do things? And then also, how do we balance that with the urgency of all the other things that we need? So when you're dealing with sustainability, it's inherently an issue of not having to be so urgent. Like, if it's sustainable, that means it's a process which allows us to be in connection with the earth. As she's changing, we're changing with her, sort of thing. So how we establish that sort of resilience is a good question, and that might mean we have to question how we plan things, because if we're trying to rush a plan, we're going to probably make the wrong choices, and then 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to realize that we have to make up for the rush that we decided to take today. So that's my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioners. I feel like we've got a lot to kind of return to and chew on from those sort of opening thoughts. I think in the spirit of kind of what Stan was proposing, let's return to some of the questions that we had as we went through and try to get those answered, and then we can start moving and figuring out what type of actions we'd like to take here. I know we had a couple kind of on this side. Would any of you like to reframe some of your, I think we started out with a question about trees and some fill material or hydrology.
Sure. I mean, I think it might be a good, I'd like the idea of bringing the applicant's representative up here. I think that the total number of trees proposed to be removed sounds like there's some new information on that. And I mean, I'd be interested in, I think what I've read at least is the provenance of the fill to bring the site up above the floodplain coming from that natural habitat area that's labeled on the plan. Some concerns with that. So I'd be interested in hearing about both of those, and I expect there's going to be questions from other commissioners.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Rochelle Swanson, part of the applicant team here, along with Lydia Delschlosser and Brian Foster, the engineer who can get into the channel questions. I do want to just have a couple of comments and answer the questions. I'm taking lots of notes, so let me know what I miss. I do think it's probably relevant in this particular project to kind of frame some context for all of you. So I have lived here for 35 years and was on city council for 8 of those years and participated in the general plan update and many of the other initiatives that have happened. And between the owners and our project team, the vast majority are multi-generational Davis sites who've also been very engaged in civic life here in Davis. So just wanted to know that is a framework in which this was born. And that's why you'll probably see some of the thoughtfulness that went in there. For the trees in particular, a couple of notes. So the beautiful thing, CEQA does what CEQA does, and that's when you get refinements from a project, and that's when you get realignment. So we do have that. It was discovered recently that within the draft DIR, because we have the proposed and the biological resource preservation alternative, that the calculation was incorrect. And so we had our biologist team relook at it, and the true numbers are out of the 1,295 trees on site currently, 394 are impacted. So not over 900, 394. And that wasn't some fancy change today. That was the reality. It's just, an EIR is a giant document. And so when you remove 47.1 acres of natural habitat from a proposition, of course those trees are going to be protected. So that was just one of the things that I think got missed in all the paperwork shuffle. And it is true we do plan on mitigating with replanting up to 4,000 trees. The goal is all on-site mitigation. Of course, that's not always possible because we're getting feedback from you guys and Parks and Recs and other folks, and what is the programming going to ultimately look like. And you guys have all had some very thoughtful comments about tree health and long-term and where does that go and how does that work with active transportation. So, saying a particular number before we get into like tentative maths and what that lays out to, I think might be a little premature. But know that the intent is there. I think it also bears me clarifying, it's come up a lot that the biological term, the scientific term of non-native being used in our biological resource assessment is not a pejorative. It's not meant to be. It's a scientific document similar to vernal pools. They use the alkali playa. That actually was always contemplated. It's why it was one of the alternatives. And so the reason you see 47.1 acres there is that's not the whole playa, but there's watershed. And this is going to have to go through permitting with U.S. Service and Wildlife. U.S. Wildlife and Service, California Department of Wildlife. It's going to have to go through the Army Corps of Engineers, and they will ultimately determine what happens there, not the developer, not even the city. So we're going to have those parameters, but know that the intent is protective. It is a very conservative number. That's why it's all 47 acres. It wasn't getting in as tight as humanly possible. It was let's err on the side of caution, which is completely reflective of the environmental sustainability commitment of the person who's really vision behind this, 65 years in the community doing that. So just thought it'd be helpful to bring some clarity there. You had a question, and if someone asked exactly what that would look like, we are going to ask our biologist to be able to give us an opinion. But the way it usually works is you get through the project, we get approval through the city council. You can't get any permits until all those other permits come in from the federal and state and regional bodies. So there's not going to be anything that's going to be disturbed until we actually get a final recommendation, and I'm also working closely with the county and with the Habitat Conservation. So I think that's key. If it's helpful, I noted a lot of your questions and could respond to them if that went for the sake of flow and time, or I can just wait and you can ask them in particular. Like there are some specifics about Channel A, and I think that's good for Brian Foster to address, because some of the movement in trees in Channel A is, again, it's balancing. You've all been incredibly thoughtful to talk about balancing the needs of the environment, the needs of housing in our crisis. Is that there's also a stormwater reality that we have. So the H Street pump station, I don't know if all of you are aware, but the city's been looking at having to upgrade that facility. And so the city actually approached some of the owners of this project to work out what is a way that we can maybe collaborate and actually save the city some money, but also improve the project. And so there's some stormwater drainage that's actually helped take off some of the flow by being able to redirect that channel. So again, it's a balancing of some climate realities that we have, as well as what the existing environment is.
Yeah, thank you for those remarks and answering some of those questions. I think what I'll ask you to do from here is we'll go through the commissioners again and maybe just rephrase or restate maybe individual questions. Some of those I think Stan can probably answer. Some of those we might tap you all and members of your team to answer as well. But thank you for your time.
I'll just stand here if you want me to. I'll just put them.
Maybe if you don't, well, actually, I'll ask you to maybe go take a seat, and then we'll kind of call you back up. If it starts being really silly and you walk up and down.
Extra steps. It's all good.
We'll reevaluate.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jordan, do you have any other specific questions that you want to go through?
I think those were the main ones. I expect lots more discussion on what our recommendation and resolution that we send to the Senate Commission and Council is. But I think I'm all right. I'd like to hear some more Channel A discussion, but it sounds like that's coming, and I'd like to allow the other commissioners to ask us some questions.
That sounds good. Any specific questions that you'd like?
More on Channel A, just to understand that.
Well, let's stop there maybe and discuss. If you have specific framing questions that you'd like to know about kind of what's proposed, or maybe you could help state either for Stan what you're interested in there, and then we can see who's best to answer that.
You go ahead.
So as you may have gathered, we don't have hydrology experts up here. So I think it actually might be helpful to maybe just give us maybe a slightly more layman's term overview of the proposed modifications, if any, to Channel A and the tree removal associated with that, because we heard a lot of concern about that from the public.
And can I just add on, since you're really there talking, I'd like to understand why you're removing it, and I'd like to understand how or how the trees are related to it. Like how many of those trees that you found out now are within Channel A versus other places on the property?
Yeah, so I'm Brian Foster, work with Cunningham Engineering. I'm part of the applicant team. So I'll back up. Channel A is part of the Covell Drain. Covell Drain is a regional drainage facility. It's serving about 12 square miles. It starts in the hills to the west of us. It's an improved facility. It's a rural facility through the county, and then it's an improved facility through the city, starting at 113, actually now with Bretton Woods, starting at the edge of the city there, coming around through Sutter, under 113, around the north side of town, and then it hits this piece, Channel A. This is the only unimproved section of Channel A that the city maintains. There is an existing easement over the channel for the city maintenance. It's about a 100-foot wide easement. It's about a 50 to 60-foot wide channel, and it is significantly grown with trees and plantings and various things, and has woefully inadequate capacity to pass the amount of flow that is coming through this area. It is probably 20% of the size it needs to be. So it brings in the drainage coming from, I guess, the north side of town over North Davis, comes underneath the railroad tracks. There's a culvert there. There's also from the North Star Ponds, there's a discharge under that. There's a trestle, and that's where H Street is also coming out. And that right there is Channel A. And then it just goes directly east across the property. With the biological preservation alternative, we have from the railroad tracks to what is called Village Trails Park, so about 2/3 of that length. Channel A will remain as is today, completely unchanged from the north side of that ditch, so that the north side of that ditch will remain, all of the trees within that will remain, and then everything to the south of that is that natural habitat preservation area, 100% untouched. And so those are hydraulically isolated areas. They just kind of function in their own little microbiome. What we are doing is we're going to take a new channel coming basically right along the edge of the north side of the city. And that channel will be along the north side of North Village route towards the corner of the city's parcel. And then you kind of see that in blue coming down the middle between North Village and East Village. That's our central detention facility, at which point we meet up with Channel A. And that is the point at which we will begin to remove trees. And so those tree removals will be from that point east to pole line. And I'll say 99% of the trees that are removed, of those 394, are removed within that segment. And that is simply because we had to expand capacity. We did to the extent that we could to the north, and we came down south, intercepted that channel, and continued into the Wild Horse Channel. That was kind of a main overview. I don't know if you want me to go into the fill material source as a part of that right now, or keep talking about Channel A.
I think if that's relevant to this discussion,
yeah. So that channel as it exists today is it's about 8 feet deep once you get to pole line. So those culverts that are going under pole line, they're 8, maybe 9 feet deep. We are going to maintain that same grade line that basically if you drew a string line from the pole line culvert to the railroad culvert, it would just be a straight grade. So that cut is going to generate a significant amount of fill. And then the UATA, the portion to the north of that, so it's got that diagonal crosshatch, that area will also be a fill source. So we're going to dig some of that farm field that's currently ag production. There's nothing beyond that within that area. And that dirt will be used for the fill material within the site. And so I did want to make a distinction between the UATA, which is agricultural, and the natural habitat area to the south, which is the alkali playa and those 404, 401 protected facilities.
When you say that, you're talking about a vernal pool.
Correct. So a vernal pool is a generalized term. Yeah. And so the alkali playa, and I'm not a biologist, I will want to caveat that, but our biologist tells us that an alkali playa and the uplands and everything associated with alkali is actually a more specific and rare term of a vernal pool. So it is just the precision with which the document is speaking, and in terms of the Army Corps and Fish and Wildlife and all of those, we wanted to be precise in our terms. So that is the basis for alkali playa versus vernal pools.
Excellent. Thank you for tying those two
Yeah.
together. Folks, commissioners, does that kind of help as we're thinking about Channel A? Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, Jordan, thanks for those questions. Commissioner Daniel, did you have any questions you'd like to, or points you'd like to return to as we kind of start thinking about maybe action items for here or specific recommendations based on what we're hearing?
I don't believe so at this time.
Thank you. Kira?
Yeah, so Jacob, you mentioned something that I was thinking about as well, which is these items in relation to the cap. And I think if this could be an action item, is making sure that in these sustainability plans you identify not only the municipal codes but also the cap items that would go along with that. So I'm in agreement with that. I also think it would be interesting, and this is potentially in the EIR, but I have not reviewed it extensively, but seeing what kind of future shade coverage studies would be, what this area would look like with trees that are fully grown in, what is the amount of permeable versus non-permeable surfaces, things like that, just to get a better idea of, how much we are no longer going to be absorbing, how much water we're not going to be absorbing in this area, and how much shade coverage will be available. So that's not necessarily an action item, just something to think about. And then I also agree on your point about active transportation and understanding what that would look like within the village homes, which this is probably something the Transportation Commission will be thinking about, but what kinds of bus lines, what kinds of potentially electric scooters or electric charging and regular parking would be available. So probably something the Transportation Commission will cover, but interesting to think about.
Thank you, Karen. Michelle, I know you had some questions.
I have several more. And some of these I'm not sure if they're for the city or for the applicant, but I'll just start with kind of the base level one. And, when I look at a map like this, the first thing I want to do is start picking it apart. Why this and why that? And so and I'm sure a lot of people looking at this do, and I know a lot of people did back when it was proposed the first time many years ago. And so I'm familiar with a lot of the complaints from back then, and I can hear them resonating in my ears right now. And so I'm curious, this floor plan layout, if you will, how much of this is set in stone? Like, is it solid? Is this based off the original, and so then they couldn't move things, or they're only moving when it had to be, like such as the vernal pools? Or I guess that's my first question, and I don't know if that's for the city or not.
Sounds like a neat question. I mean, there's some similarities, its location, but there's lots of dissimilarities. This is not a rebrand of Cobell Village. It's quite a bit different. There's some things are there, like the fire station, because that's been the general plan since '87. But I'm glad that you asked, because I think this is also an environmental justice potential answer and question. So if you look at the map, so where the location of the multifamily housing is, that was there intentional. I hear your point, Commissioner Kramer, and I really appreciate it. And when you look on some of it within the application, you'll see there's a lot of trees there. But if you look at people who are living there, we want them to be closest to Nugget. We want them to be closest to the doctor's offices. We want them to be closest to the bus line. We've got bus stops on Cobell. We are advocating, we use all your voices, we are advocating to also increase ridership and increase a bus line through the center of the development, because we would like to see children being picked up and dropped off in the morning. I think one of you had mentioned too, just about traffic offsets. We've got over 1,200 kids on inter-district transfers. We are hoping that some of them move here and get on their bikes and get out of their cars. And so another intentional location is the pre-K. Again, right there, very close and adjacent to the affordable housing, which we've got 360 income restricted. So 280 of that, 270 of that is going to be low and very low, and then the balance will be 80 to 120. So
just to clarify, when you say low and very low, so you mean 60% or below area median income?
Correct. Yeah. So as defined by Gillett County, but thank you for that clarification. The park, the large park at the bottom, is also about it being a true community park. So that location was also welcoming in people to use that. We're envisioning a lot of multi-level sports there and other programming, and so really making sure that people from all over town, and regardless of where they live and how they get there, they're able to utilize that park. And that same true when you look up, so as Brian mentioned, we have to be intentional about where the channel is, and so it's designing around that. So then in some ways there isn't a lot of wiggle room, but really looking at where do we want to have people close also to active transportation. So we have 1,130 kind of missing middle, a lot of affordable by design within that, smaller footprints, smaller parcels. Again, those are really along the south and along pole line where those bus stops are. We also are proposing to have a lot of micromobility with the goal that no matter where you live within the project, you can get on an e-bike, an e-scooter, and get down to the bus stop.
So we're thinking very much about that. And so we did do outreach with advocates, and we've attended a lot of DCAM, Legal Women Voters. We've reached out to them, participated ourselves, but also looked online and really trying to crowdsource a lot of data of what's there. I really appreciate your comments about the cap. I actually have the March 2025 report. That is where we're talking to in that one section. But I appreciate what you're saying. But yeah, we could specifically call out like VE3 or, you know, whatever about what we're doing for all electrical. So we'll update our sustainability plan. So thank you for that feedback. You had some other questions, Commissioner Bears?
I do. I think you've answered a little bit. You're saying that the Heritage Oak Park is down there meant to be like a multi-sport.
Multi-use at the end of the day. I mean, there's a reason why we also have open programming for some of this, and just even open programming on other features, even some that are outside the purview of this commission. It's always been a long-standing goal that folks want to be able to have more iterative process. So we didn't come with, this shall be A, B, C, and D. It really is, we know that there's some open flexibility there, and so we want to get that feedback from you guys.
So I guess what I see is when that's down there at the corner of Koval and Pole Line, that is bringing a lot of traffic to an intersection that's already pretty highly impacted. And it seems, I don't know, worth considering putting that instead in that northeast corner where people that are coming from Woodland, where a lot of the kids actually live, could actually come play in our parks, especially if it was a sport, you know, such as soccer fields that are across the way. I guess originally I was thinking parks are usually great when they're enclosed by neighborhoods, but at the same time, probably not very good when they're on two incredibly busy roads.
I can give you a little bit of what we got from the park, the rec, and Stan, tell me if I'm not allowed to go down this road, is that they unanimously came to the conclusion that the Heritage Park is in the right place. This was a topic of conversation. So Community Park over by Davis High School, that is on Cobell. Again, an F being open to the what community as a whole. Central Park, again, is surrounded all the way around. We did get some great feedback from maybe, you know, using some parking or a berm is there along Cobell and Pole Line as a little bit of a buffer. But they were pretty straightforward that that's the right location for it, to make sure. But there is another park up in the top. And then, of course, talking about folks coming down from Woodland, we have Nugget Fields. There is going to be an undercrossing there, again, a little outside this particular purview, but ensuring that people on both sides of the road are able to actively use all those facilities.
Well, we should also add that everybody from Woodland is going to move back to Davis and live here. So there won't be that much traffic.
Yeah, maybe I can get out of my neighborhood. I can't right now. So I guess I would disagree. I feel like that East Village is sitting right next to a racetrack, it's sitting next to a landfill, it's sitting next to a highway. It seems like a not great place to me. These are my comments, personal comments.
No, and we appreciate that because, I mean, that is part of why we're here, right, is we want to get your feedback, and I know it's a lot of balancing. So I share what Parks and Rec said, but I don't want that in any way to be like not wanting to be receptive to your comments. So thank you.
And I feel like the community park is different. That's a different kind of park, and it ultimately is surrounded by neighborhoods. So it's only up one busy street, and it's not the same. So to me, that East Village is already, just that space is already kind of an inundated space, and so to have something that's more public and that would also provide a little bit of its own buffer, just because, to me that makes a lot of sense. So, got the trees. I wanted to ask about, you said the 99% of the trees, so maybe this goes to, was it Brian? Were in that kind of section of blue. And that you're talking about where it says Green Acres, is that right? I'm sure I wish you had a pointer for me so I could be sure I was following.
Just north of Green Acres, there's that long linear, it's basically the extension of Channel A.
I'm running the cursor along that section there.
Thank you.
Best I
I'm
can
a
do
visual
right now.
person, so that helps. And so my question then would be the size of those trees. Is there any way to shift that a little bit so that we can preserve, like, say, and I'm not a tree person, we got more tree people here. I want to say like medium growth trees. The trees are big, but they're not like almost gone. Those kind of trees that are still going to provide a lot of shade and benefit to our birds and such.
Yeah, so the impetus of removing those trees is driven by the hydrology, that there's just not enough capacity in that existing ditch, the existing channel that runs through there. That's not to say, I mean, we have to match up to the full line culvert. That is one of our constraints. And so that's not to say there's not opportunity to, once we get into further design and figure out, hey, this exact tree right here could be saved, or this exact, this stand of trees here is just, it has to go. From an EIR perspective, which is where we're at now, we need to evaluate impacts so that we have a complete document. And so I don't want to say it's not on the table, but from an impact standpoint right now, we are making the statement that the trees are going to be impacted, but are open to conversation.
Okay. And let's see if I have anything else. And,
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I follow up on that?
yeah, follow up on that while I find my others.
And or other people can correct me on this, but it seems like you've mentioned that a lot of these trees people have said they're like 40 years old or something like that. And many of the trees in Davis that have been planted have a lifespan of about 60 years. Do you have any sense on, given the species of trees there and so on, what their expected lifespan would be in any case?
I don't. I would defer to our biologist, arborist on that.
Yeah. Sorry, I do not have that level of detail either at this point.
Yeah, that's the piece that's missing to know if a tree is worth saving. We don't know what they are.
So I'll just sketch out a recommendation that we move forward with finding that out and figuring out what kind of number of trees and if there's a possibility of shifting things to save something.
So I will say that certainly sounds like could be a recommendation from the commission for the planning commission and council to consider. I would follow up on that in that, pretty much any project we look at, when you come from an EIR perspective, you're looking at the conservative, the highest level of impact, if you will. So frequently when we get into design, one of our first points from an urban forestry perspective is to say, can you design around the trees? Now some to the point of what's their age and what's their life expectancy, are they in decline? Quite honestly, it might be better to remove them and mitigate versus keep. So there is that balancing act. I will say through our discussions, through staff's discussions with the applicant in this area, all of those things are on the table with the applicant as we move forward. Just frankly, at the EIR stage, you don't have that level of detail in front of you.
And I guess I don't think I have any other specific questions, but I'll just want to mention that I'm really glad to see the undercrossing. These are some of the issues that were in the last version, and I'm really glad that you're going to support. I'm not exactly sure what the details look like of the separated grade to the west. It's huge. I really want to see the housing, and I know this is in our purview, but I very much personally recommend that you do the housing in the first phase. Don't wait. This is mostly for the city. Do not let it wait, because when it waits, it doesn't happen. So, and thank you for extending the bike paths, and I am in general agreement that we need housing. I'm all for bringing housing to our city.
So I'll try and phrase this as a question, but maybe it's more of a comment. Your sustainability section is all focused on electricity and energy. And the things I've read is that equally important is conservation, so that you need less energy and less electricity. And you don't mention anything about that other than maybe conforming to CAP, and I'm not sure if in CAP what it says about the standards for insulation and so on. But I hope that your design, both of the infrastructure, the streets, and of the buildings, is focused on reducing the heat island effect and energy conservation. So that's a question.
Yeah, I think we both can answer that, but yes, I mean, the REACH code is a pretty stringent code, and I think one of you mentioned it before too about house orientation, and looking at the way the design of the streets are, and looking at, shading. And that, of course, that's really critical, is that we are looking at that very closely, because there's recommendations in CAPCOA and in CAP around tree shading, is that you have to balance that against the size of the lot, as you know, the sidewalk, and where the streets are, because we're dealing with, the pines on Lake Boulevard, we're dealing with trees that are, the canary pines, over in Mothers, where well-intended plantings ended up creating issues for the trees, frankly, not just the people, but the trees. So that is that. I would take your question as, it's a yes, we are looking at all those, and we'll be complying with the code, which is pretty good from an energy code perspective. But from house orientation and stuff, is that we can add some finer points on that as we go to Planning Commission. So thank you for that.
One of the other considerations in terms of trees that loomed frequently as very significant with the Tree Commission was the conflict with the utility lines. And I would hope that in the design you're planning the location of utility lines in such a way that it allows you to maximize the number of trees.
Can you address that? You're an engineer.
Sure. So that is being taken into account. So if you put on some spectacles, you can see on our plan we do have attached green belts on a lot of our streets. So we will have a separation of the street, which will have the joint trench carrying the cable and electric wires, typically at the back of curb, and then an offset from that to those trees. And then on the more residential neighborhood subdivisions, we would comply with the city's ordinance of 1 tree per lot. That's their standard as it is right now. And in some of some areas you can get more than that. And so it certainly will be accounted for in that design.
So there's just one other question, and probably you can't answer this, but a lot of our discussion has been focused on some details. What sorts of things, how much can go into the baseline agreement and how much it has to be left for the development agreement?
I wonder if this is a question for Stan, maybe, first?
So it's about, like we've been saying many things, it's a balance, right? If the baseline, and I'll give you my perspective. Derek can certainly jump in. So from a baseline perspective, you're looking at the overarching goals of the project. You're looking at what you really want to see from a sustainability, those types of things. If you put too much detail, honestly, if you put too much detail in the baseline, you hamstring staff and the applicant in the future. So whatever's in the baseline, they have to do. And that's great to certain aspects.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking.
But then you get to a point where we have no flexibility in the future if climate species trees change, right? So if you say in the baseline we will adhere to the climate species tree list, great. So when we change that, when we come up and go to those plantings, we can use the most current list, right? There's that type of balancing act between those things. In the DA, you can be a little more, a little more direct in certain aspects, but again, that's a negotiation between us and the applicant, what they're willing to commit to from that perspective. But that's kind of my perspective. I don't know if you guys know. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, pretty much what he said, but we'll be, but we are negotiating there's a council subcommittee, and that's there. But it's a great question. I think I would echo with Stan, just having looked at these a few times, like being aware of the dangers of unintended consequences, really great intentions, but unintended consequences. But I know that's really a council question.
Thank you. And yeah, Donna, would you mind?
Yeah, thank you for just giving me a minute. As Stan said, the baseline features are cast in stone. They're unchangeable. That's what the voters have approved. That's what has to happen, regardless of what sort of challenges it presents for the developer down the road. The DA, in contrast, is a contract that it's negotiated, it can be amended. We know they're frequently amended after being approved. I'm sure it won't surprise any of you to know that council members get a lot of pressure to put features into the baseline features so that they are approved by the voters on the ballot measure, because then they feel more reassured that the project is going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. But as Stan said, it's a balancing act, because sometimes when you put so much in your baseline features, it becomes infeasible or impractical, and things don't get done. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Great question.
Wonderful, thank you. I think this serves as a great example of helping us get more oriented in terms of considering making source considerations. I think in the future, what I would like to see from a CEJ perspective is how does new developments affect the other parts of town? I think the other council member was talking about, she was suggesting some of the impacts that this might have with the other neighboring areas. I don't have the information in front of me about what the neighboring areas needs. What are their needs in terms of sustainable housing? What are their needs in terms of trees, in terms of habitable gardens, in terms of who knows what they might need, right? So are we doing the work to really know what the communities need around them, and how does this new development support that, enhance that, and add to the Davis kind of puzzle piece, so to speak. So that's one thing that I would like to know more about. It might not be possible this time around. And then the other thing is considering also how does this development, how would it assist in our effort to have a carbon neutral environment, cityscape by 2040, which is our big climate goal. There are big questions and a lot of things to consider in terms of how things fit together. And I think these sorts of things it's a different way of planning. And those frameworks or perspectives aren't really available right now, I think, but I think that's one of the roles that one of the things that we as CEJ could do to help support development by having that sort of lens in the future.
I can actually answer that because you kind of framed it in the form of a question. So when you were asking about the developments and other impacts of town, that was a part of our outreach and part of the design, but it's also the commission feedback, right? You were here representing the community in that. So I think it's a really important question. So that's how we looked at it. Like I said, going like to DeCan and other ones and seeing it and looking at it and then having the historical knowledge, like for instance, with the roundabout being at Moore and that new crossing there, and with intentionality connecting to Nugget Fields, right? So that's just one example of trying to improve that flow, especially as people go in and out of Wild Horse, because that's an existing issue. So some of that was there. I think the 2040 neutrality we did go through, the 28, of course, not all of that applies to residential development, right? When those 28 points out of the cap, but really identifying the ones that we could do by doing that. And so some of that too is looking at, it's kind of like the comments on the trees, right? What's native today is that's really being climate forward. I know it was mentioned too on the EV as maybe both an environmental justice and a sustainability bucket, is that EV infrastructure is evolving very quickly now as there's adoption. So for instance, in the multifamily housing, we're partnering with a nonprofit developer. They're the ones that are going to have to go out and get the grants and build it. And the more prescriptive we get, the more difficult it is for them to get their funding. And so we've had some discussions even around this. There are now even programs out there that specifically work with affordable housing. And so they come in and they design a system within that parking lot and they work it out that way. If we went in and just put in chargers, those would maybe have to be ripped out or they'd be incompatible, so they wouldn't be able to take advantage of that. So that's where we're trying to be really thoughtful about that side of it, of how do we don't just say, oh, boom, check the box, we did this, now we're sustainable, instead of really thinking about, is this going to be used? Are these the right locations to encourage people to be able to have EVs? The ride share, we want to lean in onto the EV side of the ride share, whether it's micromobility or the car. So
I think it is really helpful to frame it that way. And like I said, we'll sharpen up our sustainability plan a little bit based on your collective comments and being able to say, here's the specific things we're looking at. And then there's some others that we hope that we collaboratively work. There's other parts of the project outside of your guys' purview that could work as like a carbon sink and other things like that. And so we're really looking forward to a collective conversation. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So with those questions, anyone have anything they'd like to circle back on real quick with regard to questions?
I've got one more. I'm sorry, I caught most. Can you clarify the roles on the applicant team that are here tonight?
Sure. So the project consultant on both the land use side and the public engagement, political engagement, and then Brian Foster from Cunningham Engineering is our engineering for almost anything you can imagine, from designing how everything is working together to actually really getting into the weeds and interfacing with our biological team and also like the hydrologist. And then Lydia Lily keeps us all running on the same tracks on time doing that. She's the project manager, but I don't think that's a fair title. She also has raised her voice here. She's very engaged, started a lot of programs that we all hold near and dear to our heart. So we all also collectively give feedback into the program outside of our subject matter expertise as professionals within land use. So we all can weigh into those pieces as needed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank you so much. We'll let you know if we have any further questions. And thank you, commissioners, for all those insightful questions. I'm going to do a quick time check here. We're looking at, it's just about 7:50 right now. We've got a couple other items on the agenda today, but what I would really like to spend some time on, and I don't want to shortchange us with how much time this will need, is putting together kind of a list of particular recommendations that we want to pass over to the Planning Commission and the City Council. I've been tracking some of the conversation here so far. I've been separating them into kind of 4 categories here. Kind of general recommendations that we'd like to see either within the sustainability plan or more broadly, and then recommendations based on kind of each of those sections within the sustainability plan. That being there is a sustainability section, there's an urban forest section, and natural resources section. So let me try to just summarize some of what I've caught from you all so far, and then we can start talking about whether those still seem relevant, and where we want to add some more, or if we want to revise that approach otherwise. So as a general comment, we'd like to add specific call-outs to consistency with the climate action and adaptation plan throughout the sustainability plan. Moving on to the sustainability section specifically, identifying kind of specific neighborhood design measures within the sustainability plan that would increase neighborhood sustainability, make that a little bit more specific rather than a general term of sustainable design, speaking towards things like passive solar or neighborhood orientation. Charging for electric vehicles should be in place for the affordable housing. We might want to consider, do we think there should be that should be in place at the time of construction? Do we think that that could be too constraining, I think, based on some of the comments we just heard? And do we want to pull in any other types of development here as we're considering outside of just affordable housing? As we move to natural resources, defining a mechanism of protection for the conservation area, be that an easement or through land use designations. And then urban forestry, emphasizing the connection of urban forestry with active transportation infrastructure. We could consider setting a minimum standard for canopy cover, potentially connected to the urban forest management plan. Potentially discuss maybe the phased removal of trees in connection, thinking, Commissioner Gmaj, from your comment earlier about kind of checking in with as development goes and taking a slower approach. Do we want to request, for instance, that trees are only removed as each phase initiates rather than removing all trees from the site at once? And then maximizing saving the trees in the drainage area and potentially putting forward a list of criteria to consider that. So trying to save trees based on ecologic value, conditions, or life expectancy. So those are some of the things I gleaned and probably butchered from your ideas and my own. So maybe we started with Jordan during the last conversation. Commissioner Gamache, can I start with you? Does that sound like we're on the right track here? Do you have anything you'd like to add or rephrase?
I think where we're at now, I think that's feels good for me. Appreciate your ability to synthesize all that very succinctly. I'm very impressed, actually. I think what I would like to do is also have a conversation about our own process going forward outside of this. So maybe have another motion on how we can approach things like this in the future with some sort of rubric or process. And I don't know when to have that conversation, but that's one that I would like to have. And as far as this one, I think, I've said what I can say right now, and I think in the future we'll be in a position to do a more adequate job.
So I would just add, for that, the long-range calendar item would be the place to speak to, future actions. So I don't think we need a motion in this particular venue. We can definitely take that up at that later this evening.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I heard everything, but in your first comment that they need to adhere to CAP and to the urban forest management plan, I would just add, as they are updated in the future. And then I'm not sure if you mentioned this, that to the extent possible, they should use vegetation to mitigate the air pollution from traffic on Cobell. But otherwise, you did a magnificent job.
Totally agree. Great listening skills. I guess I'm still a little bit stuck on that park down there at the busy intersection. It really bothers me. I think it's going to bother a lot of people that live in that neighborhood. You should really think about moving that. And then along with that, more specifically, I think that having charging infrastructure within that park where it's a semi-public space for parking would be super valuable. But just also wanted to ask, it sounds like you're going to several other commissions. And so I'm just curious if we as a commission want to think about or consider, or if we can, stepping away from this meeting, having a little regroup, and then submitting comments. I know we're not going to do a public hearing on the comments again, but I don't know if that would be something we want to think about or not.
I would say from that perspective, the recommendations from a commission perspective would be tonight for this effort are related to your subject matter. Certainly, as an individual, you can submit, information anytime you choose. But I would caution getting together in any other forum other than where we're at this evening.
And Stan, are you thinking, is that a timing constraint based on the process that's going forward, or a constraint on how many times you can bring specific items to a single commission?
At this particular time with the process laid out, it's a timing issue for this project.
So tonight is kind of the chance that we get to submit our comments. By the time we meet again, Planning Commission will have already taken it up. Council will have already taken it up. Sure.
Well, the Planning Commission takes it up, I believe, the beginning of May. Yeah, and given other constraints we have, it would not be possible. Plus, to be consistent with what Council laid out and with other commissions, it's one meeting to discuss the topics in their purview, make recommendations, and then the Planning Commission would have those recommendations from all of the commissions basically at the same time.
Yes. In the past on NRC, we have called subcommittees and we've called special meetings. I don't know if it's worth that. I've just put that out there.
Thank you. I think the idea of a subcommittee, I think that could really speak to Commissioner Gamache, what you were speaking to as well, a subcommittee, because this won't be the only development project that we see too. So I think that might be maybe I propose that we do discuss that during that long-range calendar position, time in the calendar, and then we also do our best to try to push forward kind of what we feel strongly about right now. We can also split this up too and make a bunch of individual motions. And so, Michelle, I'm noting kind of like the park position one. If we go kind of motion item by item, we could, see kind of what other kind of agreement we have, or maybe crack that a little bit here too.
Can I add a little bit to the park position? I think it would be interesting to know what the surrounding neighborhood, the different neighborhoods would feel about where that park is. And so if we do a mini study to ask the different neighborhoods, that would be cool to have that sort of information, since it is a shared space that other neighborhoods would enjoy, and that might be interesting to gather that information.
Sorry, Michelle, did you have anything else?
So I thought you laid that out very nicely, Jacob. Great listening skills. One thing that I would consider adding to kind of this urban forestry tree discussion would be a comparison to the current shade coverage of trees in this region and what that would look like with the removal of trees and the proposed planting. So what the shade coverage difference would be between now and then in the development.
Yeah, and I thank you for putting together, that wonderful list. I would just want to emphasize that it's really adherence to the Urban Forest Management Plan and the CAP, using those as a guideline, and specifically to consider appropriate tree species, when they're evaluating the trees, so that they're, looking at what has been recommended and is appropriate moving forward. And I think that will get at the question of the canopy, because I think that is, certainly what we're all concerned about, to make sure that the canopy is certainly equivalent to what we have or exceeds that, because that is what the concern is for all the sort of transportation lines, bike lanes, all the ability for the public to enjoy that space.
Thank you. I want to interrogate that a little bit more so I can capture that. So I wonder, I think there's probably a way that we can...
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's too specific, but the metric that's in the Urban Forest Management Plan now is that the city of Davis overall has a canopy cover of 26%. We should aim for a canopy cover in this area, in this proposal, of 30%. The difficulty there is that canopy cover covers both public and private property, and we don't know what the residents are going to be planting in their backyard and so on, but at least that's something they could aim for.
Seems like we could also target that at the public and quasi-public space as well, because that's where the developer's going to have a little more control to some extent.
And Carrie, can I ask how, with thinking about like if we do go forward with like a target canopy cover rate, would you still want to see that kind of before and after? Would you after canopy coverage comparison?
I think that this approach using the target percentage would be simpler, but if other commissioners feel that they would also want to see that, then I understand.
Excellent, thank you. And one more question for you. Would you like to see, is there any, so in the objective section of the sustainability plan, there is an objective for urban forest. The kind of lead up to that, urban forest does speak to the urban forest management plan, but would you like to see anything in that objective itself that speaks a little bit more directly to the urban forest management plan. Just wondering if we want to like suggest any additional language or anything for them.
I mean, I think the only thing that I would suggest is the whole issue over, the new climate-ready tree list that they're developing. Because that would not have been in that urban forest management plan because it was done earlier. So just refer to that being an important component of how they select the trees.
Thank you. Yeah, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. I would echo Jacob. I was trying to do something similar to what you were doing and jot down some of these ideas as we talked, and I did not do nearly as good a job as you did at synthesizing all of them, so I appreciate that. I generally am in agreement with what we've heard from the rest of the commission here. I would also just echo actually committing to installing EV charging facilities in the public spaces at the very least, I think should be a recommendation. The mechanism by which the grant funding that does that, the process, I'm agnostic to. I think committing to a certain number, especially in the public spaces where the planning can happen a little more effectively, would be a good addition. I also, I don't know if I've heard this one. It sounds like there's consideration of that at-grade crossing with the railroad tracks near F Street. I think getting the applicant to commit to that. I know it's a long permitting process and challenging, but I think that would be really important for the active transportation component of this and linking the parts of the north part of town together. And then, ensuring that the planting plan is also really focused on, again, promoting GHG reduction and active transportation through, focusing on those transit areas, green belts, all of that, I think is really strong. So I'm on board with all of that. At the risk of getting slightly on my soapbox here, but I just want to add one more thing, and this is a little bit for the applicant's team as well. Again, I want to echo, I think this is a really fantastic proposal, and there's a lot to really like about it. At the same time, when I look at the sustainability plan that was provided to us as an attachment to the staff report, I see a lot of language in here, and then when I see compliance, I see code citations primarily. And so I don't think we in this commissioner or as a city are in a position to require anything beyond the code compliance. That's totally understandable. At the same time, I see this proposal and this development branded as multi-generational Davis residents pursuing this for the good of the community, right? And when I see that, and then I see, code compliance as the standard we're meeting, and then I also see that, for example, we don't have a member of the applicants. We have their consulting team here, and I think you all have done a fantastic job. We don't have anyone from the applicant group themselves here, and I see them branding themselves as these long-term Davis residents, and I think their attendance at these meetings would be very powerful for, communicating that commitment to the community. So I don't think that informs our recommendations to council or planning commission too much, but they are just things I wanted to bring up as I'm seeing this process and as we go through this process of determining how do we effectively communicate this feedback and, what we have to say about these projects to planning commission and council. I think those are really relevant. And then just one more thing I would like to add as well, and Commissioner Gamage, I fully hear where you're coming from on, seeing what we hear from those neighborhoods that are adjacent to some of these uses and all of that. I think two things. One, I think it's incumbent upon us and the other commissioners to make these meetings really informative and ask good questions and give people a reason to come here and consider these proposals and comment and share their perspectives. This proposal is going through Planning Commission numerous times, through the EIR and the entitlement and development process. It's going to go to multiple commissions. I would say that the folks in those neighborhoods do have quite a bit of opportunity to come and speak to us about how they're feeling about these proposals should they choose to do so. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind and think about how we can make this process really informative in that fashion. And maybe on the more technical side, it may be an interesting exercise to do a GIS analysis at some point of the EIR comments received and where they came from folks and where they live in the community. Because I think that can also inform us and to a certain extent of who's chosen to voice their concerns and also being able to see where those concerns are coming from geographically. So that, I don't know if that's something that staff would have the capacity to prepare or if that's something we could ask the applicant to prepare at some point. I don't know if we're in the position to do that, but I think that is a way to get at some of that data that may be out there already, at least with the EIR process, without needing to do some additional studies. That's all I have. Thank you for humoring me, everyone.
Could I add a little bit to that? I think I agree that the city can spontaneously be more proactive in voicing its thoughts, but I also think that as the the applicants expressed that it's part of their planning process already to connect with the different communities in various capacities, and so I think a role that we can take is on having particular criteria and guidelines on how to do that, so that when they do that work, because they're already doing that work, that the work that they're doing can be shown to us in a certain way that informs us as well. And then that way, if that's part of, if the development is using a CEJ sort of community-wide impact framework or whatever, that would go a long way to creating a partnership across different stakeholders about the situation.
Thank you, too. Jordan, I did miss one item that you mentioned. They went to grade separated crossing, what locations were those grade separated crossings you were looking at?
I'd have to look back. I don't remember exactly where they were potentially proposed, but I just think they have all been very, I'm going to say, squishily proposed. That might happen eventually. And I think making that a condition that it will happen at some point in the phasing process would be good for keeping that continuity of being able to bike around the city and not deal with that grade crossing at the railroad tracks, or having a safe crossing would be important. So which one I think is up for conversation. Maybe one's easier to permit than the other. I imagine that's probably the case. But I think just having a commitment to doing at least one of those would be important.
And I'll just say that it was absolutely one of the reasons it got defeated last time.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So I've updated that list a little bit. You know, one thing I guess I didn't, all of the items I caught and were maybe a little bit more technical or specific. Would anyone like to offer maybe a more general piece of feedback that we'd like to put forward to the Planning Commission? I think a few of us have noted that we maybe appreciate the way that this proposal is balancing different types of housing, or the way that this project is proposing is balancing housing as well as environmental protections, even though we have suggestions on how to improve that. I think it would be meaningful for us to take a stance, and again, I think that would be something that we would vote on, but just want to flip that, realizing that I've kind of skied that issue so far.
I would be very open to including some language about some sort of general support for the project from this commission if we are in agreement on that.
Okay, and we'll see through the voting then, I guess. Okay. Sorry, let me just take a moment here as I think of how we can proceed with these 47 different recommendations we've got going.
This is when we throw it at Stan and let him figure it out, right?
You know, Stan, you're great, but I think Carrie could have risen to that task. I don't know.
So yes,
at wrangling us in.
Carrie is very good at it. Adrian's excels at it. However, you got me. So we're going to muddle our way through and we'll get there.
I think we'll get there. I know this will. I'm hesitant to do one by one with all of these, just because I think it could take some time. Kira, do you have a proposal?
So I was going to suggest that you do it by topic, read through all of the recommendations, and then ask if there's anyone opposed to on our commission of any of the particular items, and then if maybe we vote on the ones that people are concerned about, and if overall we agree on the recommendations, then we move in each set.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's a great proposal. Let me just take a moment here to try to craft maybe one general statement, or actually let's come back to that at the end. Donna?
I'm trying not to interject, but yeah, there's sort of a general phrase you could put at the beginning, and I just lost my file. But you have a great list here, and it's not really, in my view, it's not really up to you to figure out what exactly is the right point in time, or who and how is that going to be implemented. Some of those things you raised will be potentially in the development agreement, some will be in the entitlements. There's all different ways in which those will be addressed. So I had just some general verbiage, like that you would request that Planning Commission and Council consider at the appropriate juncture that they ensure that these issues are addressed. So you don't have to figure that out, I don't think, unless Derek or Stan disagree. I think just letting them know you want those addressed when appropriate.
Thank you so much. That is really going to make this a lot easier for me. All right, so let's start. Let's go in the specific topic areas then. So these are in reference to the sustainability plan. Let's start with the natural resources because there's only 2 of those. We request that the Planning Commission and the Council require the applicant, I guess in this case, to define a specific mechanism for protection of the natural habitat area, be that easement, land use, that be specifically defined. That's the first point. Second point being vegetation should be used to mitigate potential impacts of pollution along Cobell Road on the southern part of the proposed development area. Would anyone like to move to, does anyone have any edits, friendly amendments, or would like to strike any of that, or move to approve that?
I move to accept that as written for this section.
Thank you. Anyone second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you. And for voting, we'll do just like as we've been doing. All those in favor will raise their hand. All those not opposed can then raise their hand. So all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Thank you. All right, let's move on to urban forest. We had a little bit more on this one. So we request that the Planning Commission and Council find ways to address emphasizing the link between urban forestry and active transportation to provide shade to active transportation. A minimum standard for canopy coverage should be, a minimum standard or target for the amount of canopy coverage in the development as a whole should be established at 30%. Tree removal within the development site should be phased with the progress of development, so it shouldn't all happen at once. It should instead happen as each phase moves forward. Within the drainage, the amount of trees saved should be maximized based on the ecological value of the tree, condition, life expectancy, and comparing those trees to a preferred climate-ready plant species list that's being generated. Finally, the urban forest section of the sustainability plan should refer to the climate-ready tree plan and climate-ready tree species. Again, I'll ask for any friendly amendments as I kind of muddled through that. Good luck, Stan, trying to write all that down in minutes.
I'm going to get a copy of what you've written down right there. I'm solid.
Yes. So I move that we approve what you proposed.
Second. Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you.
Who seconded? Thanks.
All right. And sustainability section. Request that the Planning Commission and Council find a way to address adding specificity to the term sustainable design measures, for instance, by providing specific requirements for neighborhood design around passive solar or neighborhood orientation. Again, Planning Commission and Council should. Actually, let me stop there. I'm having a little bit of trouble capturing where we're falling on the electric vehicle chargers. Could anyone kind of take a stab at phrasing what they think would be a solution there for the electric vehicle charging that we'd like to recommend, and then I'll go back and kind of restate the whole thing.
I think you'd be looking to include vehicle charging stations at multi-family units and at semi-public spaces.
And I would frame that as establish a target and required level of EVCS installation at those spaces. And there could be more, there could be, for the condo to run for more in the future, but I think a baseline that we want to see the initial development will be.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. Let me make a couple changes here. Okay. I'm going to take that one last. So again, for the sustainability section, requesting the Planning Commission and Council address the topic of sustainable design of neighborhoods, that they commit to completing one grade separated crossing within the phasing plan for the proposed project, and then include a target number of EV charging stations at the multifamily and development, as well as the proposed park sites, and that target be a base target that is, I guess, required to be constructed at the time that those sites are developed. Muddled through that one a little bit, but we'll work on that. Would anyone like to offer any changes?
I move to approve that language as written.
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I don't know about EV stuff.
Thank you. No problem. All right, and we'll just do two more here. One will be a general item that we've discussed a little bit before, and then I'd like to workshop one, kind of like a more like general position. But let me read through these two that I think are a little bit more succinct here. So we'll request the Plan Commission and Council address adding specific climate action and adaptation items to the sustainability plan, including a requirement to update those items as those plans are updated into the future. And then consider the park position, gathering information from commissions and public comments on the placement of the park, that being the Heritage Oak Park in particular. Would anyone like to offer any friendly amendments or requests revisions?
I guess I would add more specifically, consider moving that park to the north side where it can act as a buffer to our city limits and to a racetrack and a landfill.
So a question, I caught that you were talking about the cap being updated, but what about the urban forest management plan?
Thank you.
Being updated.
So it would be add specific climate action adaptation plan items as well as urban forest. I think for me on this one in particular, I am a little bit hesitant with regard to the park position. I have, considering that this item has already gone to the Parks Commission, I think that they were sort of, to me, they were sort of the experts on that. So I have a little bit of hesitance putting that one forward in here. I would actually be a little bit more comfortable with just the climate, just focusing this general comment on the climate adaptation and urban forest management plan. But I can reflect that in my vote if I'm the only one that feels that way.
You could choose, if there's some hesitancy, you could take the items as separate motions.
Oh, sure.
If it sounds like there might be some challenges to either or, I would suggest doing separate motions for each, just so you have an accurate vote specific to that item.
Sure. I think that sounds all right. If you agree with that. So we'll move forward then with the first one here will be to add specific climate action adaptation specific items from the climate adaptation plan and urban forest management plan to the sustainability plan, and that sustainability plan be updated as those plans are updated. I'll move to approve what I just said. If anyone will second.
A second.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
That one is unanimous. And the second one here, reconsider the positioning of Heritage Oak Park, moving it to the north side of the park to create a buffer on the north side of the city. Gather information from relevant commissions and from public comment on that placement. And that would be a separate.
The only thing I would still add to that is about being next to the racetrack, which is causing a lot of emissions, landfill, potential, whatever kind of environmental impacts that could have on people living near that.
Thank you.
I'd like to maybe rephrase that as I'm not sure how to rephrase it, but more like, I just want to say do a study about it. That can mean a lot of things. But how do we ascertain that question of what the impact is of moving the park? How do we get that data together, and who do we talk to? And that sounds like a study to me, but anyways. Instead of just saying that we as a commission have decided amongst us that it should be moved, I would rather have that be taken under consideration by a broader body of work to really ask those questions and ascertain that movement.
I would propose something along the lines of we recommend more meaningful engagement around park placements, considering that there's a landfill and a racetrack to the north of the property, and that as it exists, it is at a major intersection.
Thank you, too. Let me try to write that up and rephrase it.
There's also the consideration of if that park is supposed to be attractive to communities, maybe people might not want to go to a park that's next to a landfill. So maybe it shouldn't be a park at all. Maybe it should be something else that's a buffer area up there. I don't know. I probably wouldn't want to go to a park next to a landfill personally, but that's my take.
I've actually been to a park that is a landfill in the Bay Area, and it's pretty sweet. It's not as stinky as you might think. Sorry, I'm still trying to write this up, but I see the point though. And so maybe I think Michelle, your language about that meaningful engagement might get us there.
I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities and perspectives. I think that meaningful engagement would be really critical, actually, in this. I really do see it something that people would be opposed to. So I'd like to see this proposal go through. Making sure people are cool with it, I think, is important.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going for here then is we request that the Planning Commission and Council require more meaningful engagement around the park placement to consider potential hazards from the existing roadway and potential hazards or benefits from sorry, let me back up a little bit. More meaningful engagements around park placement to consider potential hazards from the existing roadway and the potential for the park to act as a buffer to the existing racetrack and landfill. Commissioner Gamache, how do I? Well, let me leave it there.
You may want to specify that it's Heritage Park.
Thank you. I do want to do that. Okay, so more meaningful engagement around Heritage Oaks Park's placement to consider potential hazards from existing roadway and potential pros and cons of locating the park on the north side of the city to buffer the racetrack and the landfill. And then maybe that speaks to kind of your concern about the proximity to the landfill, but also the potential benefit of.
Is part of this suggesting that somebody consider this or look into it, or are we actually proposing that it be moved or something?
I think so the way I was kind of hoping is so we're requesting the Planning Commission and Council to maybe complete more meaningful engagement, which would kind of be us telling them that we think you should kind of consider this or further work on it, I guess, without us necessarily making a specific recommendation at that time.
Yeah, I don't think we know enough about it to make a specific recommendation, but putting it to some committee or further consideration, I mean, that's fine.
getting there. We're getting there. Thanks everyone for listening to us. I don't know, make some sausage or whatever that.
I'll just point out that it would seem to me that if they were to move that apartment, that would then mean residents would be located down there, and you're then exposing the residents to these things. So it's not clear to me that there's any advantage one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just mention that.
I'm hoping that so the final language here would be more meaningful engagement around Heritage Oaks Park's placement and consider potential hazard from existing roadway and the potential pros and cons of buffering the racetrack and landfill to the north, and provide a final recommendation based on that engagement. So there's a lot of things going on in that run-on sentence. What I'm hoping is that it kind of speaks to, and I think Stan, as you were saying too, we'll have to, you'll be putting all of these into the minutes, I guess, or how does that?
So from this perspective, what I would say is once the recommendations are done over the next few days, Jacob and I will get back together, back and forth, make sure all of it that we're in line with everything that's been written, and then yes, all of them would go into the minutes for next month. But in essence, Jacob and I would work together to make sure we have the right language that you guys have discussed here.
Thank you. And we have the benefit of the recording too.
And we do have the recording, which we can watch as many times as it takes.
That's a horrible proposition. That's a step of nightmares. Okay, so the iteration right now that we're considering a request planning commission and council to address starting the request planning commission and council complete more meaningful engagement around the location of Heritage Oaks Parks. Consider the placement and the potential hazard from an existing roadway and the potential pros and cons related to moving the park to the north, buffer the racetrack and the landfill. Provide a final recommendation based on that engagement.
I move we approve that.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. All right, and last but not least, I haven't even tried to sketch this one out yet. Does anyone would anyone like to propose any more general kind of judgments on this project or kind of capture a larger statement here?
I mean, just to get us started here and keep the ball rolling, I would suggest something like, the CEJC respects and appreciates this project's commitment to balancing the needs of the community and the community's housing needs with sustainability and natural resource preservation, and is generally supportive of the project concept. With respect, if we want to make a gesture to our other motions, we can, but something like that. It probably wasn't any easier to do to write, Jacob, but thank you.
It's very much helpful. All right, so the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission appreciates the project's commitment to balancing environmental and housing balance in the city, and is generally supportive of the project in light of our proposed recommendations.
I like that. So moved.
Thank you. I'll second that one. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Thank you all. Excellent. That does it. This single item of which we have several more to go. So it is now past 8, though. I think we will all do a break here. We will also have to do votes to pick up any further items. As a reminder, the next couple items on our list here. Commission business, nomination and selection of vice chair. News on the April, the cancellation of the April meeting, and finding a date for the May meeting date and time. It's just about 8:30 right now. Let's try to give ourselves just a 5-minute break here. So that would take us to 8:37. And then we'll come back and we'll vote on each of these items, whether we can or cannot take them up. Here.
Okay.
We're being recorded.
We are recording again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thanks, commissioners. Okay, so we've got 3 more items to cover here. Nomination, selection of vice chair, April meeting, cancellation, and May meeting date and time. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should also say the long-range calendar also. Before we start in on those items, I just want to give you all a chance. Would anyone like to suggest moving any of those items ahead in the queue? Are you comfortable with how they are laid out right now?
Should we do the long-range calendar next?
Yeah, I don't have any objection to that. Let's take the long-range calendar. And we do have to vote, sorry, before we pick up any of these items, we do just have to do a quick vote to confirm that we want to because it's after 8. So all those in favor of taking up the long-range calendar item, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, anyone abstention? Great. So long-range calendar. Dan, do you have anything you want to lead us through here as we start this
So we do have kind of an updated calendar. This calendar, this long-range calendar more conforms with what the city's standard is, if you will, that the city clerk put out. So there's a little bit in there. Obviously, it has your purpose and function for the commission, just as a reminder to keep on point. Then you have some annual reviews, and they have approximate dates check mark. I mean, obviously, you know, things slip forward or back a little bit sometimes. And then when we get into the specifics, you have here where tonight, you know, these are our main items up in here. And then, as a reminder, you have the general plan update joint meeting on April 23rd. That was messaged out. I think we got responses. I was on vacation the week, but I believe most of you responded back, either to myself or Adrian, and we did convey that information. And then, as noted, with the different item, although we had a conflict with our normal April meeting, and due to the Village Farms item being needed to be put forth, I made the decision at that point to provide that to the other commission for that evening. Normally, Jacob, I would check in with you, kind of a short time frame there to make that call. So normally we would have a conversation around that as well. And then the May meeting, which is the other item on the agenda, is a holiday. So if we do want to meet in May, we would need to look for a different date, and we can talk about that when that item is up. And then if you notice at the bottom, there were a couple ideas brought up last meeting. So anything that doesn't necessarily have a date or time in the slot in the next months, we have listed at the bottom. So they're just general topics that have been brought up that we didn't actually work to put on a specific date at this point in time. So it's just kind of keeping an eye on it. So yeah.
Thank you. And Stan, I know the city's going through a process of recruiting for new commissioners too. Could you give me an idea of when that recruitment process is happening?
Well, I believe there's a number of folks that are up come June. So I do think council has a desire to have those, in May. But I'm not positive of that. The subcommittee, it depends on the number of applicants they get that they have to interview. And then they do have a number of commissions that are looking at that, so it could slip. But that's my understanding. But I don't have anything firm to provide on that front.
Thank you. Appreciate that. To start the discussion off, I think we've all noted today, or a few of us have noted today, that we do really want to emphasize that environmental justice discussion. We need to get that back up before everybody. Maybe we can start thinking about like where we can fit that in. I would actually maybe suggest my first thought here would be to fit that into the May meeting, which we'll hopefully be able to find another time for. But that would, if we add new commissioners in June, they might not get that, but I think we could also probably work around that in some ways. But what do you all think about that, when we should be raising that environmental justice discussion?
I would love to bring it in May because I am done in June. I'm told that my commission position is done.
I am also done in June, and so May would be helpful.
I firmly believe May is important because
Okay, that sounds great. Can I then maybe would it work to maybe move the integrated pest management annual report to the June meeting instead?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. We certainly have, both of those other ones could be shifted if needed, but the IPM would certainly be able to be moved, no problem.
And Stan, we have a couple more development proposals coming at us in the semi-near future here, right? Do you have a sense of when those might show up on our plate?
Unfortunately, Dara left. So I know there's one other EIR that's in the mix. That hasn't been in front of council, I don't believe yet. So I'd assume it would follow somewhat similar process here in the next probably 3 to 4 months, maybe a little longer. And then the other projects that are out there, I don't believe are at that far. So it could be a bit further out for some of them.
The reason I asked that is because if I recall correctly, I think it may have been last summer, we were looking at a development rubric in the NRC, and I believe other commissions as well. I don't know if we've seen a follow-up on that, but if there's a time to pick that up, Commissioner Gamage, that I think is sort of along the line, maybe not exactly, but maybe a good framework for some of the discussion you were wanting us to have, and that would be good to do before the next proposals in front of us.
Yeah, and my memory is that was an effort that the city council was putting forward for those peripheral developments in particular. Am I remembering correctly that they had a rubric that they were going to be using?
You are. I was actually just going to make that same comment. So I believe it's on the website, but there was a council subcommittee that proposed to council a full rubric that they ultimately approved, I believe. But that's kind of been the end of that effort. I'm not aware of any further enhancements to that to date. This might be an item that potentially you could put on the agenda basically to ask guidance from council in that arena, since it's already been developed to some extent. Now, if it's a rubric specifically around your commission and how those questions you want to ask for these things, I don't see any reason why you couldn't go there. But if it's more encompassing than that, that's probably some. And I will say, the city clerk did provide guidance. They do have a process now on how the commissions would get items to council. I don't have that for me, but that is definitely something for the next meeting that I would want to bring forward and walk through with the commission as well. So that's one item I'll add to this as well, because I think that'll help inform when you have those topics that are, okay, we want to understand if council really wants us to dive in here, and then we get that in front of them for their guidance.
I have a question. So typically in April we have environmental recognition awards, and previously the NRC has had subcommittees where we've helped kind of choose who those awards would go to, and I noticed this year we do not. Is this just a temporary year where we don't have it, or are the environmental recognition awards not being continued?
Great question. The answer is it's temporary. Given the changes we had in the team, retirements and the shift, we were not able to move forward as we have in previous years. So we're taking a look at that over this year, and I fully expect that we'll have that back in front of the commission and moving forward come next January when we normally would start that process.
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so we've agreed to make sure we focus that main meeting on environmental justice. When we add folks to the commission thereafter, hopefully then we'll all be able to kind of get them up to speed, and that will help our work moving forward on some of those other development proposals that will come through. I believe in the past, this long-range calendar has also been a time when we've discussed subcommittees. So as we're talking about kind of that development rubric, Commissioner Gamage, would you like to speak to maybe some of your thoughts on what you think might be a useful subcommittee as we look forward to some of those future developments?
Yeah, sure. I think we should have a subcommittee on clarifying our process in like what sort of questions we like to ask, or like what sort of information we like to be brought forth. Oftentimes I am faced with a lot of on-the-moment decision-making, but I don't have the adequate information in front of me to feel good about it. And I feel like if the presenters knew what we as a commission are looking for, or, like if we better knew what we're trying to look for, then they're going to be able to give that information to us more productively. And then I'll feel more comfortable, like, knowing whether I'm voting properly. So I don't know whether that helps, but that was my response.
Yeah, I think that helps tremendously. Kind of like a subcommittee for focused on sort of developing questions and areas of concern specific that we'd like to see for new development during our development review process.
And it's not just the development review either. I think that's an important part, but as a commission, there are certain areas that we should have a purview over, like an understanding of areas of what, like climate, environmental justice could mean a lot of different things. And so what particular aspects of climate and environmental justice do we want to focus on and emphasize as a group? And then those can be purposed for development, but also other considerations like the waste management and like all these other things that we've seen so far.
Thank you. That is really helpful. So it's a little bit more generally focused of a subcommittee, but kind of the core product there would be maybe a list of areas of interest, a list of like topics or questions that we'd be looking for from kind of all the presenters that we have coming to us. I think that would be incredibly useful.
I think part of that could be also how we feel like we relate to the other commissions as well. So certain areas of focus might overlap, and then we can create those relationships with those commissions to help flesh that out. Because like Transportation Commission, for example, it overlaps with our review a little bit, but it's like where's that overlap, and how do we do our part of it, and how do their part of it, sort of like figuring that
out. So one thing I would say is, as we think through how to structure this and the purview and topic areas of this subcommittee, I think we should be very thoughtful about not rehashing, because the authorizing resolution for our commission was readopted recently. I don't think council is going to have a lot of interest in revisiting that. And I think we should just be very clear on what the end result or end product or deliverable, if you want to use that term, like what are we looking to accomplish within this subcommittee that doesn't sort of steer us across the lines into what is another committee doing, or how are we thinking about these things that gets away from our authorizing resolution as well.
I think that's a very excellent point. I think if you structure the subcommittee around looking at the 4 or 5 key points for your enabling resolution, and how, if you have questions around what those meanings are, fleshing that out, and then ultimately, I suspect you'd put that in front of council and say, this is what we understand our enabling resolution to be, or defined by, and then council would ultimately provide that, that feedback for you to have that idea moving forward.
And so, Commissioner Gamage, would it be maybe, because one of the things that I think is relevant in our authorizing resolution, and again, I don't think we're going to be able to revisit that in the near future, but maybe overlaying some environmental justice sort of framework on that, because that authorizing resolution, I'm looking at the purpose and functions at least right now. I'm sure it has a language elsewhere, but in the purpose and functions, those 5 bullets, it actually does it say environmental justice anywhere? I don't think it's actually in those 5 bullet points. So I think, sort of some sort of crosswalk between environmental justice concerns in each of these topic areas that may inform commission questions and information we like presented. I don't know. That might be a framework that we could consider for that subcommittee.
And part B is justice, basically.
It is. I think a lot of these you can tie back to it pretty directly. It's just a matter of it's never in there explicitly, and I think there's some where it's squishier than others.
So then so we can certainly chat through kind of what that might look like from an agenda item, and then focus on putting that on a future meeting.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great.
I think it makes a lot of sense to do that after our EJ discussion in May as well, whether in the same meeting or in the subsequent meeting, so we can do that together. If that makes sense to the rest of the commission here, Commissioner Gamache, I don't want to step on your toes because I know that you brought this forward.
Yeah, no, I think I just mostly wanted us to have an opportunity to have a conversation about it, so putting it on the long-range calendar is where I think we are. That's satisfactory for me, and then in that space of that meeting, we'll hash these other things out.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know Commissioner Walsh also expressed interest in that kind of topic too. So it'll be great to have him here, hopefully, for that meeting as well. So that would mean in May, we're doing the climate-ready tree list information, the environmental justice discussion, and then discussing the forming a subcommittee on kind of the items we've talked about so far.
Okay.
I'm optimistic that we can do all that.
We can chat about that. but yeah, that's fine.
I'm sorry, could you give me a little more clarity? Did you say that we were just talking about those, I forget what they're called, directives, what's the word for it? We were just saying that the city council gave us.
Enabling resolution?
Enabling resolution.
Yeah.
Did you say that would be part of the environmental justice or a separate one?
Kind of separate, more using that subcommittee to help us maybe activate the enabling resolution a little bit more, and helping us understand kind of how we function through that enabling resolution, and how folks can bring information to us that fits that. And then as a separate issue in May, we'd be doing a major topic will just be the environmental justice framework that you all created, bringing that forward to our work now.
And the subcommittee is not then looking at the EJ framework at all? Is that...
It will. I think it would intersect with what that subcommittee is doing. That wouldn't necessarily be the main focus of that subcommittee.
Right.
The subcommittee would, for instance, take the questions in the environment. The way I would kind of conceive of it, the subcommittee would be taking the questions in that environmental justice framework and putting them maybe into another document that also includes some of our questions about urban forestry, some of our questions about...
Yeah, I would suggest that's an excellent question and discussion topic for that item in May. Yeah.
It's all about sequencing this.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And thanks for talking that through, everybody. So any other items to discuss on the long-range calendar here?
Last note I would say is, obviously you don't have to wait for these meetings to provide the potential asks for topics in the future. You can certainly email those in. I would say email Jacob and myself, and then we can talk about that and then populate it. And then as a commission, you could decide whether or not you want to agendize that in a future date, but we can always populate it to have that discussion informed during this period. So
Probably also copy whoever the vice is when we elect one.
that would be correct.
When we elect. All right. So with that, unless there's any final notes, I think we can move to close that item. So that was item number 7, long-range calendar. Let's circle back now to some of the other items as we were just talking about nomination and selection of vice chair. Again, we have to take a vote on whether we can do that vote right now. So all those in favor of taking up the nomination and selection of vice chair, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed? So that motion actually carries, since I can count even this late. But I would like, as we jump into this discussion, maybe I would love for you folks who wanted to push that off, push back on us and let us know what you're thinking.
I think my concern is the people that are missing this evening, and then also there's going to be turnover very shortly. I'm just not sure what the proper time is.
Yeah, my only consideration was pushing this back either a month or to the next if we want to wait until June, or July, we can do that, but my main thing is it's 9 o'clock, we have a partial commission here, it might make sense to push this out a month, but that's just my perspective.
Those were my same thoughts as well. I know that here tonight we have several people also that will be leaving in June, and so I don't know if we want a temporary vice chair for like 2 months and then redo a vote, or if this would be one that would extend into the year.
I believe that's actually what was on the calendar too, is that it would only go until June. This vice chair election would only serve until June.
Thank you for that clarification. I'd also offer to, since it's just going through June, that does give us a chance to kind of re-up in the near future, and also just in case I'm not here or you all revolt and don't lock the doors next time I come after today, that you can still have your meeting. So I do hear you all there, but I would actually I think I would stick with the I would still propose that we do nominate and vote on someone, so that we have kind of an alternate until June 30th, although I do hear those concerns. But let me open it up to you folks, if any of you would like to change your minds and not vote on it. Or maybe a better question, would anyone like to volunteer to be vice chair going forward? Commissioner Gamage? Anyone else like to volunteer? So do we have to, I was hoping we could do like a debate or something. Okay. I won't belabor the point.
Can you tell us why you were on? No, just joking.
Well, my date is ending on June as well, and I'm going to resubmit. I don't know whether I will be accepted to come back. So, I mean, either way, I may not come back. And so if I'm vice chair until then, it might work out.
Excellent. Well, let's see. How do we?
You would just need a motion.
Cool. Well, I move to nominate Commissioner Gamage as the vice chair.
I second that.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. And you sure can. Make it unanimous. Congratulations.
And Michelle, did you second? Okay.
Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. And so that item's now closed. Now let's combine C and D, take those two together. And all those in favor of discussing the April and May meetings, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Unanimous. How surprising. All right. Stan, can you take us away on this?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the long range, these should take hopefully 30 seconds. As I mentioned in long range, I did offer up our April meeting slot of availability to a different commission to ensure that they had an opportunity to talk about Village Farms. They had some of the same challenges we had with membership not being able to attend, so I did do that. That was my decision. So you can send in an email if you were listening, please. The May meeting is on a holiday, so we need to shift that. What I would offer to save time, since we're after 9 o'clock, I can simply poll the commission once I figure out a couple dates that might work, and then we'll go from there. We don't have to figure it out this evening. I just wanted to make sure everybody's well aware that that email will come out to you hopefully this week, way in advance of that time, so hopefully we have a date that we can figure out. So, okay.
Sounds great.
Excellent. All right. Then I guess with that, unless anyone has any final remarks that they want to know about those two meetings.
I move that we adjourn.
I second. All those in favor, get up and leave. Thank you very much.